The first thing he felt was the cold. Not the cold of winter or night, but that peculiar cold you feel when your body no longer feels like your own. His legs moved on their own. His arms hung limply at his sides, as if they belonged to someone else. And in his head, instead of thoughts, there was white noise. Then came the smell. Manure, damp firewood, rusty iron. That's not how things smell in a dream. He realized that right away. His eyes opened and saw the back of a woman in red. She was walking ahead and didn't look back. Her back was straight. She walked like someone expecting a blow between the shoulder blades at any moment. People stood on both sides, dozens of faces. Not a single kind one. Someone spat at his feet. Someone threw a clump of dirty snow. An old man in white walked at the head of the group, holding a rusty key aloft as if it were a crown. Artem's brain kicked in 3 seconds later. Assessment. This isn't my body. About 25 years old, lightweight, undernourished. His hands were thin but calloused from the shaft. The uniform on his body resembled a Korean military uniform from the Joseon era, only the cut was coarser and the fabric reeked of blood that had been washed but not completely removed. A wedding. Mine. Judging by the faces around me, I have until sunset to live. The old man stopped. He turned around. He placed the key in Artem's palm and uttered a long phrase, every word of which Artem understood, even though the language wasn't Russian. Captain Haejin's house is being transferred to Private Han Jae-woo for his service to the crown. The land, the yard, the estate, and the widow. The crowd began to murmur. Someone laughed. The woman in red finally turned around, and Artem saw her face. Not hatred, not anger. Weariness. The deep, seared-in weariness of a person who had buried too many and grown tired of counting graves. She was about 26 years old, thin, sharp cheekbones, dark, utterly empty eyes. She looked at him for 3 seconds. Then her lips moved. Quietly, so quietly that only he could hear. Don't drink the wine. Don't eat the soup. And for the love of all the gods, don't go down to the basement at night. Artem's expression didn't change. A sapper's expression never changes when he's told there's a mine under his feet. He simply stops breathing for half a second. He takes it in, and he starts to think. The wedding table was set up in the courtyard. Long planks on trestles, clay bowls, rice, soup with a murky film on the surface, a jug of wine. Village head Pak sat at the head of the table and raised his cup. His son, Pak Min-ho, sat next to him. Young, strong. He wasn't looking at Artem, but at So-yeon. He looked at her the way one looks at something that will soon be taken away. Artem noticed this. He made a mental note of it. Threat file, line 1. The village head poured wine into Artem's bowl. Himself, personally, with a smile. Artem raised the bowl, brought it to his lips. And the moment the village head turned away to pour himself a drink, he tipped the wine into his shirt. The icy liquid ran down his chest. The fabric soaked it up. No one noticed. He didn't touch the soup. He just sat there, poking at the rice with his chopsticks. So-yeon sat 3 seats away from him. She wasn't eating. She wasn't drinking. She was staring at the table. The wedding ended when it got dark. The guests dispersed. The village head patted Artem on the shoulder and said he wished him a long night. There was so much venom in his voice that there was no need to bother with poisoned wine. Captain Haejin's house stood on the edge of the village, right by the forest. A stone foundation, wooden walls, a tiled roof with a hole in the left corner. The yard was surrounded by a fence made of crooked poles. There was one horse in the yard, skinny. Its ribs were sticking out. 7 chickens were by the porch. Artem walked around the house. It was a habit. A sapper always walks around the perimeter of a building before entering. 20 steps along the north wall, 18 along the south. The house wasn't level. The east wall had sagged. The foundation on that side was cracked. He went inside. 3 rooms, a kitchen with a hearth, a pantry with half a sack of millet, and a bedroom. So-yeon was already inside. She was sitting in the corner on a mat, her back to the wall, her hands on her knees. Something glinted in her right hand beneath a fold of fabric. A knife. A small one. A kitchen knife. She held it like someone who wasn't planning to attack but was ready to defend herself. Artem didn't pretend not to notice. He simply sat down against the opposite wall, far away, so she could see his hands, both empty. Then he took a candle and began to walk around the house from the inside, methodically, room by room, wall by wall. The threshold, the windowsill, the chimney, the ceiling beams. 20 minutes later, he found 7 hidden notes, not traps, worse, small waxed pieces of paper with ink marks glued in specific places, under the bedroom threshold, under the pillow, in a crack in the chimney, on the back of the shutter, on the underside of the kitchen table, in the door jamb of the pantry, and one on the roof, right above the spot where Soyeon's mat had been. Artem knew what these were, not in this world, in his own. In war, that's how fire spotters worked. Beacons, signposts, markers for whoever might come from outside. Each piece of paper said the same thing. The target is sleeping here. Hit here. He didn't remove them. Removing them would mean showing that you know. Instead, he rearranged them, carefully, without rushing. He moved the 2 markers from the bedroom to the empty pantry. He moved the marker from the roof 3 steps to the left. He repositioned the marker from the chimney to the chimney on the adjacent wall. When he was done, the storage room looked like the master bedroom and the bedroom looked like an empty room. Soyeon watched him in silence. She didn't ask what he was doing, but the knife in her hand dropped 2 fingers lower. Artem lay down by the storage room door, not inside it, by the door. He placed the pickaxe next to him, which he'd taken off a nail in the entryway. Heavy, rusty, but well-balanced. He had to wait until 3 in the morning. First, the fence creaked. Then soft footsteps on the frozen ground. 3 pairs of feet, Artem counted by the sound. The first was heavy, the second was light. The third was limping on the left leg. They opened the door to the house without a sound. That meant they'd oiled the hinges beforehand. That meant they'd been here before. That meant they knew the layout of the house. 3 shadows slipped into the pantry to where the markings indicated 2 people were sleeping. Artem stood behind the doorframe, a pickaxe in his hands. His breathing was steady, his pulse was 72. The first mercenary bolted back into the hallway a second later because the pantry was empty and he realized he'd been tricked. Artem met him with the handle of the pickaxe to the bridge of his nose. The second one took a blow to the knee. He spun around. He drew his knife. Artem grabbed his wrist and twisted it. A bone cracked. The third one, the limping one, turned out to be the most dangerous. He had a short sword and knew how to use it. Artem retreated into the doorway. It was too narrow. There wasn't enough room to swing a sword. The limping man lunged forward. Artem swayed to the left. The blade struck the doorframe and got stuck for half a second. That was enough. The pickaxe came down on the limping man's forearm. He dropped the sword. Artem kicked him in the chest, sending him flying out of the house. A minute later, all 3 were lying in the yard, alive, broken. One was moaning. The other 2 were silent. Artem stood over them, breathing evenly, the pickaxe in his hand. No fear or anger on his face, just work. Like defusing a bomb. Found it, diffused it, move on. He turned toward the house. Soyeon stood in the doorway, a knife in her hand. But she wasn't looking at the mercenaries. She was looking at him. And for the first time that night, something other than emptiness appeared in her eyes. Not gratitude, not fear. A question. She said quietly, "You're not what he said you were." Artem didn't ask who he was. He didn't ask what he had said. He just nodded and went to tie up the mercenaries. Something pricked the inside of his wrist. He looked down. A tattoo. Thin lines emerged on his skin like ink on wet paper. A pattern he couldn't read, but a voice rang out in his head, clear and distinct, as if someone had flipped a switch. The seal of the marriage contract has been activated. Trust level 6. He didn't know what that meant. Not yet, anyway. But he knew one thing. In a house where the wife sleeps with a knife and guests arrive with swords at night, the most important thing isn't the walls or the locks. The most important thing is for the person on the other side of the door to stop fearing the person on this side. He dragged the mercenaries out past the gate and left them on the road. By morning, they had crawled away. Artem returned to the house. He sat down against the wall. So-Yun sat across from him. 3 meters of empty floor separated them. She was still holding the knife, but her eyes were no longer empty. A small, angry flame burned in them, the flame of a person who, for the first time in 5 years, didn't know what tomorrow would bring. And for some reason, that wasn't scary. The morning began with a rooster. A skinny, one-eyed rooster crowed at dawn so loudly that Artem jumped up and, for the first half-second, didn't realize where he was. Then he remembered. A foreign body, a foreign world, a foreign wife with a knife 3 meters away. So-Yun was already awake. She was sitting by the hearth, stoking the fire. Her movements were precise and sparing, not a single unnecessary one. Artem stood up. His body ached, not from the fight. His body had been aching even before that. Han Jae-woo carried so many old bruises and untreated wounds within him that Artem simply stood there for the first 5 minutes, counting. Left shoulder, 2 ribs on the right. His right knee clicks when he bends it. A scar on the back of his head, a long one. From being struck by something heavy and blunt. Not an enemy's weapon, too smooth. Someone had struck him from behind. One of his own. Artem committed this to memory. The secrets file. Line 1. So-Yun set a bowl in front of him. Rice. Not much. Maybe a third of what an adult man would need. She set it down and walked away, silently. She was about to sit down in the corner with her hands empty. Artem looked at the bowl, then at her. Then he divided the rice into 2 equal parts and pushed the second half toward her. She paused, looked at the rice, looked at him. Something flickered across her face, a small one, almost imperceptible, like a crack in a pane of glass that had held for 5 years. She sat down, across from him, not in the corner. They ate in silence. The rice was bland and cold. Artem ate slowly, not because he wanted to show he wasn't in a hurry, but because his body was so emaciated that his stomach clenched with every bite. Han Jae-woo had been starving for a long time, maybe weeks, maybe months. He felt a twinge in his wrist. Trust level 10. Access to the first level granted. Artem didn't let on. He finished his rice, got up, went out into the yard. The sun was low in the sky, a light frost. The snow was slushy. He walked around the yard. 7 chickens, 1 horse. Half a sack of millet in the pantry. A well 20 paces from the house. The water was murky but drinkable. The fence was rotten. The gate was hanging by a single hinge. It was 300 paces from the village to the house along a path through the field. The forest began 50 paces behind the house. Dark, coniferous. The slope goes downhill. Artem did the math. If attackers come from the forest, they'll have the high ground for the first 20 steps. Then comes a flat stretch. Then the yard. The fence offers no protection. The door offers no protection. The only thing protecting this house is that it stands on a stone foundation, and the foundation goes deep. Too deep for an ordinary peasant's house. Artem crouched down by the east wall, where the foundation had cracked. He pressed his ear against the stone. Silence. Then no silence. Something very low, almost inaudible, as if something were humming deep underground. Not a car, not water, something else. He stood up and went into the house. So-Yun was standing by the entrance to the basement. A wooden door in the floor, heavy, with an iron ring. She was looking at that door as if behind it lay not a basement, but a gaping maw. Artem approached. She didn't step back. He told her he'd heard the rumbling. She replied that the rumbling had always been there for as long as she could remember. Her father used to say that beneath the house lay those who had guarded the kingdom before humans existed. Stone and will, nothing more. She said this in an even voice, as if retelling a fairy tale she'd heard 1,000 times, but her hands were clutching the hem of her sleeve. Artem pulled the ring. The door gave way. Behind it was a staircase leading down, made of stone. The steps were worn smooth. The air from below was cold and dry, not damp, dry, like in a sealed room. They went down together. So-yeon led the way. She knew where to step. On the third step, she stepped over a crack in the stone without looking. On the seventh, she went around a ledge on the wall. She'd been here before, many times. Below was a corridor, narrow, stone walls, carvings on the walls, lines and symbols that Artem couldn't read but which his sapper's brain automatically categorized. A warning, instructions, a map. 3 types of symbols, 3 different handwritings, 3 different eras. The corridor ended at a door, a stone door, a massive one. It was open, just wide enough for a hand. A slit let in a faint bluish light. Artem peered inside. A room the size of a garage. The ceiling was low. A statue stood in the center. A full-size stone warrior, 2 meters 10. Armor made of stone. A sword made of stone. A face made of stone. Its eyes were closed, but one eyelid was slightly ajar, a slit. And from that slit came that very same bluish light. Artem walked around the statue. He looked at it the way a bomb disposal expert looks at an unknown device. Not with delight, not with fear, with professional curiosity. This isn't a statue. It's a warhead on standby. The body was made of a material stronger than stone. Joints, articulations, mechanics. Not magic, but engineering, which he didn't understand but recognized by its principles. This thing had a load. It had material. It had a breaking point. He had to find it. At the base of the statue lay a slab with an inscription. So-yeon crouched down beside it. She read it. Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. The one who waits, the first of the 8,000, sleeps at a word, will awaken at a word. The word belongs to 2. 2 keys, 1 door. Artem looked at his tattoo, then at So-yeon's left wrist. She had the same one. Older. Faded. She'd worn that mark alone for 5 years. He asked her how many doors were downstairs. She held up 4 fingers. This was the first one. 3 more after it. Each one bigger than the last. Each one deeper than the last. He asked what was behind the last one. She didn't answer. She simply stood up and walked toward the stairs. The conversation was over. Artem paused for a second. He looked at the warrior's stony face. The calculator in his head clicked into action as usual. 1 warrior, behind the first door. If the scale is linear, then behind the 4th there will be about 1,000 of them. If exponential, then more. 8,142. The number popped into his head as if someone had written it directly into his memory. Not his thought. The thought of the seal. He went upstairs. So-yeon closed the basement door. She placed a mat on top of it, as if she were hiding it, as if she'd been doing this every day for 5 years straight. Artem went out into the yard. He sat down on the porch. He took out a stick and began to sketch on the ground. A habit. When his brain is overloaded, his hands draw a map. The house, the yard, the fence, the forest, the village. Distances, lines of fire, blind spots. He drew for 20 minutes. So-yeon came out and stood behind him, silently. She looked at the sketch. She didn't understand what it was, but she could see it wasn't a drawing. It was a calculation. She said he was strange, not like a soldier, not like a peasant, not like a nobleman. Something else. Artem didn't answer, because the truth was too long, and the system would count the lie as valid in 24 hours. He simply said that he knew how to build, and that he was going to make this house so that the nighttime visitors would no longer come. She looked at him. for a long time. Then she said one word, "All right," and she went back into the house. Artem remained seated. A plan was taking shape in his head. Not a military one, an everyday one. 28 days until the spring review. In 28 days, he needed to do the following: fix the roof, reinforce the fence, dig a moat around the house on at least 3 sides, find food, not half a sack of millet for 2 people, but a decent supply. Sort out the basement, sort out the village headman, sort out whoever is sending the mercenaries. And the hardest part, sort out the woman who had lived alone in this house for 5 years, with corpses under the floor and a knife under her pillow. 28 days. Artem stood up. He went to look for a shovel. On the 3rd day, Artem began digging. He told the villagers he was digging a new well. No one believed him, but no one bothered to check. The shovel was dull. The ground was frozen. It took him 4 hours to dig the first half-meter. Han Jaewoo's hands were covered with calluses on top of old calluses. Artem didn't stop. He was digging a trench, not a well. A trench 1.5 meters deep and 1 meter wide along the north side of the house. The north side was vulnerable. The forest, the slope, a blind spot for surveillance. If the next guests came again, they would come from there. By evening on the 3rd day, a quarter of the trench was finished. Artem was standing waist deep in the dirt, covered in mud, when he saw a figure on the path from the village. Small, a girl, carrying a basket. Park Ha-un, the village headman's daughter, 19 years old, as slender as a reed. Her hair was braided. Her face was round, with freckles. She was beautiful. And terrified, so much so that the knuckles of her fingers, clenched around the basket's handle, had turned white. She approached the fence and bowed. Deeply, too deeply for a simple visit. She said her father had sent her to congratulate him on his marriage and to deliver a gift. Inside the basket lay rice cakes, 3 of them, and a small pot of honey. Artem looked at the basket, then at her hands. Her hands were trembling, not from the cold. "The contact on the detonator is shaking." A phrase from his past life. When you see a wire trembling, you don't grab it. You sit down next to it and watch to see where the vibration is coming from. He climbed out of the ditch. He brushed off his hands. He took the basket. He set it on the porch. He opened the little pot of honey. He sniffed it. Honey is honey. But at the bottom of the pot was a thin layer of something murky. Sediment, not honey. Artem closed the jar. He looked at Ha-un. She was standing there, waiting for him to eat it, or to chase it away, or to hit her. She was waiting for anything but what he did. He told her, "Come in and eat with us." She froze. He repeated it, calmly. No smile, no threat, just an invitation. She came in. So Young was sitting by the hearth. She saw Ha-un and her face turned to stone. Artem sat down on the floor. He placed the flatbreads between them. He pushed the little pot of honey aside. Ha-un looked at the pot, then at Artem. He asked her what her father would do if she returned with an empty basket. Not an empty pot, but specifically an empty basket. Because an empty basket means the offering was accepted. A full one means it was refused. And then the village elder would have to explain himself. Ha-un remained silent. Then her chin began to tremble. She said her father had told her to stay until morning to make sure he ate the honey. And if he didn't, to put it in the water he uses to wash his face. Artem nodded. He asked what would happen if she came back and said she'd done everything, but he wouldn't do it. She said her father would check. Her father always checks. She wasn't crying, but her voice was so thin and so steady that it was worse than tears. The voice of someone who had long since stopped believing that anyone would help. Artem took the little pot. He went out into the yard. He poured the honey into the ditch. He came back. He washed the pot, filled it with clean water, set it in front of Ha-un, told her to take the empty pot and the empty basket to her father and tell him that the guest was very grateful and had eaten everything right in front of her. Ha-un looked at him as if he'd said the sun now rises in the west. So-yeon watched in silence. They divided the flatbreads among the three of them. Ha-un ate greedily, like someone who hadn't been fed their fill in a long time. When she left with the empty basket, So-yeon said the girl would come back. Artem replied that he knew. So-yeon asked why he'd let her go. He could have kept her and interrogated her. Artem said she wasn't an enemy. She was a projectile launched by someone else. You don't interrogate projectiles, you defuse them. So-yeon looked at him for a long time. Then she said he sounded like someone who'd spent his whole life disarming other people's traps. Artem remained silent, because that was the truth, which he couldn't yet explain. On the fourth day, he continued digging. On the fifth, he finished the northern side of the trench and began the western side. So-yeon came out on the fifth day and silently picked up the second shovel. They dug together for 6 hours, without speaking. They simply tossed dirt out of the pit. A rhythm, a strike, a toss, a strike, a toss. By evening on the fifth day, the trench on both sides was ready. 1 meter 20 deep, 80 centimeters wide. Not a fortress moat, but for nighttime visitors with knives, it was enough to lose 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time. It's enough time for a sapper to cut through a wire. On the sixth day, the village headman's son arrived, Park Min-ho, a sturdy 23-year-old, broad shoulders, angry eyes. He didn't come alone. 2 others were with him, villagers, strong guys. Min-ho stood at the gate and said that digging ditches on village land without the village head's permission was forbidden. This was crown land, not his. Artem stood in the ditch, shovel in hand, dirty, wet. He looked at Min-ho and said that the land didn't belong to the village, it belonged to him. By royal decree. He had the key on him. Min-ho spat and said that the king's piece of paper meant nothing in these parts. Here, the village head makes the decisions. Artem climbed out of the ditch, slowly. He didn't drop the shovel. He approached Min-ho to within 2 steps. Min-ho was half a head taller and broader in the shoulders, but Artem noticed something. Min-ho wasn't looking him in the eye. He was looking past him, behind him, at the house. No. At the front door. No. At So-yeon, who was standing in the doorway. Artem stepped to the left. He blocked Min-ho's view. Min-ho blinked. He shifted his gaze to Artem. And in that look, Artem read everything he needed to know. This isn't about the land. It isn't about the ditches. It's about her. Artem said in an even voice that the ditch on his land had been dug for practical purposes, that the village head's permission wasn't required, and that if Min-ho wanted to discuss this further, he should bring a written decree with a seal. Min-ho stood there, thinking. The 2 men behind him exchanged glances. They didn't want a fight. They wanted to go home. Min-ho turned and walked away. But as he left, he tossed over his shoulder that Artem would regret it. Soon. Artem watched his back. Then he turned to So-yeon. She stood in the doorway with the same stony expression, but her fingers on the doorframe had turned white from her grip. Artem told her that Min-ho hadn't come to see him. She replied that she knew. He said it had been a long time ago. She replied that Min-ho had come to her first husband 3 times, asking him to give her back. Captain Hae-jin laughed every time and said that things aren't given back, things are used. Artem felt something tighten inside him, a wire, taut and hot. Not anger. Anger is an emotion, and emotions get in the way. It was a decision. Quiet, final. Like the decision of a bomb disposal expert who sees that a mine isn't in a field, but on a playground. It needs to be diffused, not later, now. He said 3 words to So-yeon. No one else is coming. She didn't believe him. Of course she didn't, but she heard him. On the 7th day, a new figure appeared on the path leading to the house, not from the village, from the direction of the southern road. A woman, tall, wearing a worn military jacket altered into a travel raincoat. A bag of tools hung from her belt, medical tools. She walked quickly and confidently, like someone who knows exactly where she's going. Yoon Da-hee, 28 years old, a former field medic with the 3rd Infantry Company, the very same company where Han Jae-woo had served. She approached the gate. She saw the moat. She raised an eyebrow. Then she saw Artem. She stopped. She looked at him for 10 seconds. Artem stood there waiting. Da-hee said she'd come to check if the rumor was true. They say that coward Han Jae-woo is alive and has been given land. Artem said he was alive. Da-hee stepped closer. She looked at his face, then at his hands, then at the moat, then back at his face. She said he wasn't moving the right way. The Han Jae-woo she knew used to move like a beaten dog. But this one stood like a pillar, looking as if he were in a minefield and he was the only one who knew where the mines were. Artem said nothing. Da-hee said she didn't care who he was. Only one thing mattered to her. She asked if he remembered the night at Bloody Ford. Artem said no. Da-hee nodded. She said she figured as much, because Han Jae-woo couldn't possibly remember that night. He'd been knocked unconscious before the massacre began. Not by the barbarians, his own men. She fell silent. Artem waited. Da-hee said she'd spent 3 days dragging him out from under the corpses. 3 days, because no one wanted to help. Because everyone thought he was dead. And when she pulled him out, everyone said he was a coward who'd been pretending to be dead. And no one asked why he had a mark on the back of his head from being struck with a sword hilt. His own sword. A commander's sword. Artem instinctively touched the back of his head. The scar, that very one, smooth and deep. Da-hee saw his gesture, and for the first time during the entire conversation, her expression softened. She said she would stay. Not for long. She needed a place where no one would look for her, and he needed a doctor because his body was falling apart. Artem didn't argue. So-yeon stepped out onto the porch. She looked at Da-hee. Da-hee looked at So-yeon. The two women silently sized each other up for 5 seconds. Then So-yeon nodded and went back inside. Da-hee turned to Artem and said his wife had given her approval. Artem didn't bother explaining that this wasn't approval. It was merely a concession, a nod, the bare minimum, but enough. That evening, the 3 of them sat by the hearth. Da-hee examined Artem. She counted his wounds. She frowned. Artem asked her what she knew about Captain Hae-jin. Da-hee replied that she knew enough to hate a dead man. So-yeon sat in the corner. She listened. She remained silent. Her hands were clenched into fists so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. On the 8th day, Artem began building. Not a moat. The moat was already complete on 3 sides. Now he was building a wall. Not out of stone. There was no stone. Out of earth and poles. An old technique. An earthen rampart reinforced with wattle and daub. Not pretty, but in a 2-hour assault, 50 men would lose 20. Simple math. He worked from morning until dark. So-yeon helped. Silently. She carried dirt in baskets. Her hands were small but strong. 5 years alone on a farm turns anyone into a worker. Da-hee didn't help with the digging. She had other things to do. She treated Artem. Every evening. Compresses on his ribs, ointment on his shoulder, a massage on his knee to stop it from clicking. Da-hee's hands were rough and precise. She worked in silence. Only occasionally would she curse under her breath when she found yet another old bruise that shouldn't have been there. She said that Han Ji-woo's body had been beaten systematically. Not in battle, in the barracks. Marks from a stick. Marks from a belt with a buckle. Marks from a boot. She asked who had done it. Artem didn't know, but Da-hee knew. She said that in the 3rd Company, privates were beaten for everything. For getting up too slowly. For standing out of line. For breathing out of sync. Captain Hae-jin beat them himself. At that moment, So-yeon was standing behind the wall. Artem heard her stop moving. She froze. For a second. Then she rustled again. He didn't turn around. On the 9th day, Ha-eun arrived. Without a basket. Without her father. Alone. She came early in the morning while the village was still asleep. She approached the gate. She shifted from foot to foot. Artem went out to meet her. She said her father was preparing a denunciation. A denunciation against Artem. To Magistrate Cho Byung-il. The denunciation stated that the new owner of Captain Haejin's house was ravaging the land and building fortifications without permission, which constituted preparation for a rebellion. Artem listened. He asked when it would be sent. Haun said in 2 days by a mounted messenger. Artem asked why she was telling him this. Haun was silent. Then she said that Artem was the only one who had ever treated her to a flatbread. Not the only one in a year, the only one in her entire life. Artem didn't comment. He made a mental note. The Allies file. Entry number 1. Haun left. Artem returned to the house. He sat down. He thought. The denunciation was a problem. Magistrate Cho Byung-il was a problem of a much greater caliber. If the magistrate sent an inspector, the inspector would see the moat and the rampart. He would see that the former coward was building defenses, and he would draw his own conclusions. He had to stay one step ahead. Artem spent his 10th day in the village. It was the first time he'd ventured beyond the boundaries of his own yard. The village was small. 30 yards. About 100 people, counting the elderly and children. Half the houses stood with boarded-up windows. People had left or died. The war had taken the men, famine was taking the rest. He walked around every yard, without going inside. He just looked. He counted. The village headman's barn stood in the center of the village. Large, sturdy, the only building in the village that looked well-fed. Artem walked past it. He noticed a lock on the door, new, made of iron. Everything else in the village was wooden and rusty, but the lock was new. He noticed something else, too. The path from the granary to the village headman's house was more heavily trodden than the paths leading to the other houses. People walked along it more often, or carried something heavy along it. Grain. Artem checked the communal granary, the one that was supposed to feed the village until spring. It was empty. The floor was swept clean, not a single grain. He asked the old woman who lived in the house at the far end where the communal grain had gone. The old woman looked at him with the kind of expression people have when they're used to keeping quiet. She said she didn't know. Artem didn't press her. He walked on, toward the blacksmith shop. The blacksmith shop stood on the southern edge of the village. It was small and sooty. The blacksmith, Lee, was a man in his 50s with scorched hands and a silent face. A girl was working beside him, 17 years old, wearing a man's jacket, her hair tied in a bun, her hands covered in soot. Lee Ga-yul, the blacksmith's daughter. She stood at the anvil, shaping a horseshoe. A blow, a turn, a blow. Steady. Artem stopped and watched. She was working correctly. The angle of the blow, the force, the rhythm. Not like an apprentice, like a master who doesn't yet know he's a master. She looked up. She saw him. She wasn't startled. She didn't bow. She looked him straight in the eye. She asked what he needed. Artem said he needed 3 things: hinges for a gate, staples for a fence, and pots, clay ones, thick-walled with narrow necks. She raised an eyebrow. She said that hinges and staples were the blacksmith's business, and pots were the potter's. Artem said he didn't need a potter. He needed pots that could withstand pressure from the inside. And such pots aren't made by potters, but by people who understand how force works in a closed space. Ga-yul froze. She set down her hammer. She looked at him with that look you get when you hear music you've long wanted to hear. She asked why he needed pots that could withstand pressure. Artem said it was so that something inside the pot could expand very quickly in one direction. Ga-il was silent for 10 seconds. Then she said that if expansion in one direction was needed, the walls would have to be uneven, thicker at the back, thinner in the front, and the throat shouldn't just be narrow, it should be conical. Artem smiled for the first time in 8 days. She understood, without explanations, without blueprints. She grasped the principle of the cumulative charge intuitively in 10 seconds. He asked her name. She answered. He said he'd come back tomorrow with the drawings. She said she'd be waiting. Blacksmith Lee watched from the sidelines, silently, with the expression of a man watching his daughter talk to someone for the first time, not about the weather or marriage, but about something that made her eyes light up. Artem went home. That evening he sat with Dahi and sketched, not on the ground, on a piece of cloth with charcoal. Dahi watched. She asked what it was. Artem said it was a directed charge. Black powder in a clay casing. With the right proportions, 3-to-1, and the right shape of the pot, the explosion doesn't go in all directions but in one, like a fist. Dahi looked at the sketch, then at him. She said that in the army she'd seen how gunpowder was used. They'd throw the pot and it would explode haphazardly. Half the shrapnel would fly toward their own men. Artem nodded. He said that was because no one here thought about the shape of the charge. Everyone thinks about quantity. More gunpowder means a bigger explosion. But it's not about quantity, it's about direction. Dahi smiled and said he definitely wasn't Han Jae-woo. He was as afraid of fire as a cat is of water. Artem didn't say anything. So-yeon sat in the corner and listened. She didn't understand the blueprints, but she understood something else. The man sitting in front of her, sketching a weapon on a rag, wasn't the person they'd forced upon her. He wasn't a coward. He wasn't a soldier. He was something she couldn't name. And that was both frightening and reassuring at the same time. On the 11th day, Artem went to the village again. This time he wasn't alone. Dahi went with him. Dahi had a bag of medicine. They went from yard to yard. Dahi examined the sick, for free. She set the shoulder of the old woman from the house at the far end, which had been hurting for 3 months. She gave a child from the neighboring yard a cough remedy. She dressed the stump of a man who was missing his left arm. It had been festering because there was no one to change his bandages. Artem walked beside her, silently. He helped. He held things. He handed them over. The village watched. People stepped out onto their doorsteps and watched. That very same coward, Han Jae-woo, had brought a doctor. For free. No strings attached. It was so unlike anything they'd seen from their masters in recent years that they didn't know how to react. Some thanked him. Quietly. Hesitantly. Most remained silent. But that evening, as Artem was walking back home, 2 men from the village came out to meet him on the path. Not with weapons. With a question. They asked if it was true that he was digging a trench around his house. Artem said it was true. They asked why. He said it was because people with knives came at night. And a ditch is the first thing to slow down a person with a knife. They exchanged glances. One said that people had come to their place too. 2 months ago, they took their last goat. Artem asked who. The man said the village headman's men. Artem nodded. He said that if they wanted, they could dig a ditch around their houses too. He'd show them how. The depth, the width, the angle. They'd show their neighbors. The men left, in silence, but Artem saw how they walked, not hunched over, a little straighter. On the 12th day at 3 in the morning, Artem woke up to a sound that shouldn't have been there. Silence. Complete, absolute. No wind, no creaking, not even the rooster's breath on its perch. That kind of silence happens when all living things have held their breath. He opened his eyes. Darkness. Then something stirred in the darkness. Not by the door, not behind the wall, inside the room. 3 steps from his mat, between him and So-yeon, who was sleeping by the far wall. A silhouette. Slender. Black. Motionless. The figure stood in the center of the room like a statue. Artem didn't move. He didn't breathe. His eyes had adjusted to the darkness. The silhouette turned its head, slowly, towards So-yeon. A blade glinted in its hand. A short blade, straight. Not a kitchen knife, a professional one. The silhouette took a step toward So-yeon. Artem acted, not with a leap, not with a shout. He sat down. Loudly, deliberately. The mat rustled. The silhouette froze, turned toward him. Artem said in a calm voice not to touch her. If there's going to be a conversation, it's with him. So-yeon woke up. He heard her breathing change. It became ragged. But she didn't scream. She didn't move. She lay there and listened. The silhouette stood there, silent. Then a voice, a woman's, young, cold. The voice said she had orders. 2 bodies, no traces. Artem said he understood. An order is an order. But he wanted to ask one question before she began. Silence. Then the voice said he could ask. Artem asked what the Cho clan would do to her if she returned having failed. Silence. A longer pause. He couldn't see her face, but he heard her breathing change for half a second. Artem continued. He said he knew how organizations like this worked. An operative who failed became the next target, not as punishment, but because he knew the faces of the clients. A living failure was more dangerous than a dead success. She remained silent. Artem said his hands were tied. He raised his palms. He showed her. Then he slowly brought his hands behind his back and interlaced his fingers. There. Tied. Now they could talk. She didn't move for 30 seconds. Then she took a step, not toward him, not toward So-Yun, to the side. She sat down on the floor, the blade in her hand. But the blade was pointing down. Artem spoke, quietly, calmly, like a bomb disposal expert talking to a bomb. Not because the bomb can hear him, but because his voice helps keep his hands from shaking. He told her she wasn't the first one they'd sent to him, that before her there had been 3 men with knives and a girl with poisoned honey, that he hadn't died, that those who sent them also know he hadn't died, and that each subsequent person they send is more expensive. She's more expensive, which means she's the last attempt before the client decides it's cheaper to burn down the whole house than to send another one. She asked how he knew that. Artem said he'd been defusing traps his whole life, and that she wasn't a trap. She was the person they'd put inside the trap. Silence. A long silence. So-Yun lay on her mat. She didn't move, but Artem knew she was hearing every word. The killer stood up. She walked over to the window. Artem saw her silhouette against the starry sky. Young. Thin. She moves like a cat. About 22 years old. She said that his words changed nothing. She had orders. Artem replied that those orders were the words of a dead man who didn't yet know he was dead. Because if she was here, then the Cho clan had already made its move. And that move had reached the village on the border. And that means someone in the capital is very nervous. And nervous people make mistakes. And mistakes are what get them caught. She was silent. Then she sheathed her blade, not in the scabbard, behind her belt. But she sheathed it. She said she was leaving. She said she'd be back, not as a threat, as a fact. She left through the window, silently, as if no one had been there. Artem unclasped his hands. They weren't trembling, almost not. A faint flicker appeared on his wrist. He didn't look. So-Yun sat down on the mat. She looked at him in the darkness. He couldn't see her eyes, but he could feel her gaze. Heavy, like a stone at the bottom of a river. She didn't say a word. She lay back down. But that night, for the first time in 12 days, she wasn't holding a knife in her hand. It lay next to her on the mat, but not in her hand. Next to her. Artem lay down. He closed his eyes. He didn't sleep until dawn. The morning of the 13th day began with a cry. A rooster was crowing. Then a hen clucked. Then they both fell silent. Artem went out into the yard and saw a fox. Red, skinny. She was sitting by the chicken coop with a feather in her teeth. 2 hens lay dead. 5 remained out of 7. Artem chased the fox away. He picked up the dead chickens. He looked at them. Meat. Not much, but meat. He took them to So-Yun. She took them. Silently. For lunch, there was soup. Real soup. With meat. The 3 of them ate together. Artem, So-Yun, Da-hee. The first hot soup with meat in all this time. Da-hee ate and complained that there wasn't enough salt. So-Yun ate in silence. But she ate 2 bowls. Artem noticed. He made a mental note. She eats more when she's not alone. After lunch, Artem went to see Gaul. The drawings were ready, drawn in charcoal on fabric. 3 pots, different sizes, with conical necks, with uneven walls. Gaul looked at the drawings for a long time. She traced the lines with her finger. She asked about each dimension. Artem explained. The thickness of the bottom, the angle of the cone, the diameter of the neck, the purpose of each element. She listened eagerly, like someone who had been drinking drop by drop their whole life and was suddenly given a glass. She asked what would be inside the pots. Artem said gunpowder. She asked if it was ordinary gunpowder. He said no. 3 parts saltpeter, 1 part sulfur, 1 part charcoal, fine, very fine, ground to a fine powder. She said that in the village they made gunpowder differently, 5 parts saltpeter. Artem said that 5 was too much. It burns too fast, a flash, not a blast. You need 3. Then it burns more slowly. The pressure builds evenly. And the pot doesn't blow apart right away, but acts like a barrel. 1 second, a second and a half. That's enough for the shrapnel to fly in one direction. Gaul listened with her mouth agape. Then she closed her mouth, pressed her lips together, said she'd have it done in 3 days. Artem left the blueprints and headed home. On the way, he stopped by the village headman's barn, stood there for a moment, looked at the lock. New. Shiny. Then he crouched down and looked at the ground around him. Tracks. Lots of tracks. Cart tracks. Deep ones. Heavy cargo. The tracks led from the barn to the village headman's house and back. Not to the communal warehouse. Not to the other houses. Only to Pak's house. Artem stood up. He walked on. A plan was taking shape. Clear and cold. Like a minefield map. On the 14th day, something happened that Artem hadn't expected. So-Yun spoke. Not just 1 word. Not 2. She was sitting by the hearth that morning and said she needed to tell him about the basement. Artem sat down. He listened. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully, like someone who had forgotten how to speak and was learning all over again. She said that the house wasn't built over a basement. The house was built over a temple. The temple was 300 years old. It had been here before the village, before the kingdom of Sonam, before the wars. Her clan had guarded this temple for generations. The He clan. Not nobles, not warriors. Priests. Guardians. They had one task: to ensure that what sleeps below does not awaken. 3 centuries ago, an invasion came from the south. A stone army was created to stop it, and it did. 8,142 warriors of stone and will. They stood as a wall, and the enemy crashed against it. But then the army didn't stop. It ceased to distinguish between friend and foe. It killed everyone. The priestly lineage sealed it away again at the cost of half their own people. Since then, the seals have been weakening. Each generation of guardians has renewed them. Each generation has paid the price. Her father was the last guardian. He died 7 years ago. He renewed the seal alone, because by that time, the He clan had died out. Wars, disease, the purges carried out by the Cho clan, which had betrayed the priests 300 years ago and had since been eliminating anyone who might know the truth. So-Yun was left alone, alone for the entire clan, alone for the entire seal. Her marriage to Captain He-jin was not her choice. Magistrate Cho had appointed him to keep the house under control, to keep her under control, so that if the seals weakened, the key would be in the right hands. He-jin didn't know about the army. He'd been told there was gold in the basement. He spent 5 years looking for the gold. He beat her when he couldn't find it. Then he went off to war and never returned. So-Yun fell silent. Artem sat there. He didn't move. Something was working inside him. Not emotions, a calculator. He was adding it all up. The priestly lineage, the seals, the stone army, the Cho clan, the magistrate, Captain He-jin. 300 years of betrayal. And one woman who's been carrying all of this on her shoulders since she was 17. He asked one thing. "The seals are weakening now." She nodded. He asked how much time was left. She said she didn't know. Maybe a year, maybe 2, maybe a month. His father had said that the last renewal was weak, that the next keeper would need someone by their side. The second key. She looked at his wrist, at the tattoo. Artem looked at her wrist. The same tattoo, older, faded. 2 keys, 1 door. He asked why she was telling him this now. She replied that it was because he hadn't gone down to the basement on the first night. He hadn't gone after the gold. He didn't go after power. He rearranged the markers and lay down by the door with a pickaxe, because he had neutralized the killer with his voice, not a sword. Because he had shared his rice with her. Because for 13 days he had done everything for the house, not for himself. And because the system tells her that trust has reached the point where the first words can be spoken aloud. Artem nodded. He said thank you. She didn't answer. She stood up and left. The conversation was over. But the wall between them had grown thinner. On the 15th day, Artem decided to take action. The plan with the village head was ready. In the morning, he went to the village. Not to the village head, to the people. He went from yard to yard. He spoke with everyone, quietly, without unnecessary words. He asked the same thing. How much grain are you entitled to from the communal reserve? People answered. They gave numbers. Artem added them up. The village's total winter reserve was supposed to be 200 sacks of millet. 200. There was nothing in the communal warehouse. The village head's granary was locked. Simple math. By noon, Artem was standing in the village square, a small patch of trampled earth by the well. Next to it stood the communal warehouse with its door wide open, empty. People had gathered around, not everyone, but enough, about 30 people. Artem didn't shout. He didn't accuse anyone. He simply asked the question out loud. Where is the grain? 200 sacks, which were supposed to be here. The people were silent. Everyone knew the answer. No one wanted to speak. Artem turned toward the village headman's granary. He walked toward it. Village headman Pak burst out of the house, red-faced, angry. Min-ho followed him. The village headman yelled that the granary was his property and that no one had the right. Artem didn't stop. He reached the barn. He looked at the lock. He turned to the crowd. He said that the key to the communal warehouse was kept by the village head. That was the rule. But the grain from the communal warehouse belonged to the community. That was also a rule. He asked the people if they wanted to see what was in the barn. Silence. Then an old woman from the house at the far end said yes. Then a man with one arm missing said yes. Then another and another. The village head turned pale. Min-ho stepped forward. Artem didn't step back. He stood there, a shovel in his hand, the very one he'd used to dig the ditch. Min-ho looked at the shovel, at Artem, at the crowd. The crowd was looking at him, not with rage, with anticipation. The quiet, hungry anticipation of people who had eaten watery porridge all winter and knew that their food lay behind the wall of that granary. Min-ho stepped back. The village headman shouted that this was a riot, that he would write to the magistrate. Artem said let him write, but for now let him open the granary, or Artem would open it himself, with a shovel. A lock against a shovel. The village head didn't open it. Artem struck the lock. Once. The latch snapped. The door swung open. Inside the granary stood sacks, lots of them. Artem didn't count them. The people behind him were counting. 173 sacks. Millet, barley, dried turnips. Barrels stood nearby. Salted pork, honey, butter. The village was silent for 3 seconds. Then everyone started talking at once. Artem didn't wait. He began carrying the sacks out, one after another. He set them down in the square. People approached, first one at a time, then in groups. They took the sacks and carried them home. The village elder stood by his house and watched. His face was ashen. His hands were shaking. Min-ho stood beside him, his fists clenched. But he didn't strike. He couldn't. 30 pairs of eyes were on him. Artem distributed the grain in 2 hours. Each household got its fair share. 4 sacks for the old woman in the house at the far end. 6 for the fatherless family. 3 for the blacksmith. He left 20 sacks in the community warehouse. He locked it up. He gave the key to the old woman. Not to the village head, to the old woman. Because the old woman wouldn't steal. The crowd dispersed. But something had changed. Artem could feel it, just as one senses a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. The village looked at him differently. Not as a coward, not as an outsider. As a man who had done what they'd wanted to do for 3 years but were too afraid to. On the path home, So-yeon caught up with him. She walked beside him, silently, but close. Closer than usual. An arm's length away, not 3 meters. When they reached the yard, she said that the village head was now his mortal enemy. Artem said he knew. She said that Min-ho would try again. Artem said he knew. She stopped at the door. She looked at him. She said that for the first time in 5 years, the village wasn't spitting at her back as she walked down the street. Today, 2 women had nodded to her. Artem said nothing, but her touch on his wrist was warm, soft, steady. Trust level 20. He didn't look at her. He went inside. Dahi was sitting by the hearth, brewing something from herbs. She looked up. She looked at him. She said she'd heard. The whole village had heard. Artem sat down. Dahi said she had something for him. She'd wanted to give it to him for a long time. She'd been waiting. Now it was time. She took a bundle out of her bag. It was made of cloth. Old. She unwrapped it. Inside was a notebook. Thin. Worn. The cover was stained. She said it was the diary of Private Kim Tae-hyun. From their company. He died on the night of the Battle of Bloody Ford. But before he died, he managed to write down what he had seen. She said that Kim had seen Captain Hae-jin leave the camp 3 hours before the barbarians' attack. He didn't leave alone. With him was a man wearing the colors of the Cho clan. They spoke quietly. Kim crept closer. He overheard them. Hae-jin had told the man from the Cho clan the locations of the guard posts, the layout of the camp, the guard change schedule, everything. The barbarians attacked precisely where the weak spots were, because they knew where to strike, because they'd been told. Dahi fell silent. Artem held the diary. He didn't open it. He looked at Dahi. She looked at him. She'd carried that notebook for 5 years. For 5 years, she'd been looking for someone to give it to, someone they would believe. She said Han Jae-woo had seen it too, or at least part of it, because Hae-jin had hit him on the back of the head that night, knocked him unconscious, threw him into the thick of the battle, so he'd die and keep quiet. But Jae-woo didn't die, and Kim didn't quite die either. He managed to write it down. Artem placed the diary next to him. He turned toward the wall behind which So-yeon was standing. Silence. Then footsteps. She entered. She stood in the doorway. Her face was pale. Her hands were at her sides. She had heard everything, every word. Her husband, the man who had beaten her for 5 years, the man she had buried in a sealed coffin. A traitor. Not just a bad husband, not just a cruel man, a traitor who sold out his own soldiers for the Cho clan's money, who killed Han Jae-woo because he had seen something, who wore a uniform and medals for 3 years for a battle he himself had betrayed. So-yeon stood in the doorway. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just stood there. Then her knees buckled, slowly, as if something inside her had snapped. That last pillar of support that had held her up for 5 years. The illusion that at least her husband's death had been honorable, that at least he had died as a soldier. No, he died like a rat. And she had mourned a rat for 5 years. Artem didn't rush to her. He didn't hug her. He didn't comfort her. He simply stood up and walked out of the room. He left her alone. No, not alone. Dahi stayed by her side, quietly, without a word, just there. Artem stood on the porch. He looked out at the courtyard, at the moat, at the rampart, at the forest. Inside him, a string was stretched to its limit. Not anger, a decision. The Cho clan, the magistrate, the village head, all part of the same chain, the same network. And somewhere at the center of this network, there was someone who knew about the basement, about the army, about Soyan. Someone who wanted the key. His wrist was burning. He looked down. Trust level 25. The second door is open. A rumbling sound came from beneath the house, louder than before. Two stone eyes opened in the darkness beneath his feet. Soyan didn't leave her room until evening. Dahi sat by the door, silently. Artem didn't go in. He knew there were things that couldn't be fixed with his hands. All he could do was wait until the person decided to get back on their feet on their own. Instead, he went down to the basement, alone. The first door was open. The stone warrior stood there just as before. One eye was slightly open. A blue light shone from it. But now, beyond the first room, there was a passageway. Before, there had been a solid wall. Now, a gap, wide, as tall as a person. Artem squeezed through. The second hall was 4 times larger than the first. The ceiling was higher. The air was drier. And standing there were 10 statues. 10 stone warriors in a row. Identical armor, identical swords, identical closed eyes. But not identical sizes. The first was 2 meters tall. The second, 210. The third, 220. They grew taller. Each subsequent one was 10 centimeters taller. The 10th was almost 3 meters tall. Artem walked around the formation. His sapper's eye was at work. Joints, articulations, material, the same as the first ones. Not stone, something stronger, something that looks like stone but rings when tapped with a knuckle. Metal inside a mineral, or a mineral inside metal. He didn't know, but he knew it was engineering, not magic. Engineering he didn't yet understand. A stone slab stood against the wall. It was carved, extensively. The symbols were smaller than those above. 3 layers of text. Artem couldn't read it. The language was unfamiliar, not the one spoken in the village. Older, more ancient. But next to the text was a map. He could read the map. A map is a universal language. Lines, points, scale. On the map was a village. His village. A house, a basement, and a line ran down from the basement, a long one, leading into the depths. At the end of the line was a circle, a large one, and inside the circle was a number. He couldn't read the number written in those symbols, but according to the map's scale, the circle was the size of the village. The entire village. Beneath the village lay something the size of the village itself. Artem stood there, staring at the map. The calculator in his head was clicking away. 10 warriors on the second level. If it's a linear progression, then 100 on the third, 1,000 on the fourth. That makes a total of 1,111. But the seal said 8,142, so the progression isn't linear. That means there are more than 7,000 on the last level. So that circle on the map isn't a storage facility. It's a barracks. An army barracks for 7,000 fighters made of stone and willpower, beneath a village of 30 households. He went upstairs. Soyeon was standing by the basement door, pale. Her eyes were red, but dry. She wasn't crying anymore. She'd been through it and come out the other side. Artem told her what he'd seen. 10 statues, the map, the scale. She listened, nodded. Then she said that only she could read the map, or someone from the lineage of the keepers. Artem thought of Gayul, the blacksmith's daughter, whose grandfather had been a weaponsmith of the priestly lineage. He didn't say anything. It was too soon. 24 hours to tell the truth. He would tell her, but not now. Right now, something else mattered. He asked So-yeon what the number inside the circle on the map meant. She went down with him. She looked. She read it. She said it wasn't a number. It was a name. The name of the one who commanded the army 300 years ago. The first keeper. Her ancestor. His name is carved in stone because he sacrificed his body to seal the army. He didn't die. He became part of the seal. He lies at the center of the circle, sleeping. He's been holding it for 300 years. Artem asked what would happen when he could no longer hold it. So-young didn't answer, but her silence spoke louder than any words. They went upstairs. Night. Silence. Artem sat by the hearth. So-young sat across from him. For the first time, not in the corner. Across from him, within arm's reach. She said she wanted to ask something. Artem told her to go ahead. She asked who he was. Not Han Jae-woo. She'd figured that out a long time ago. Han Jae-woo was afraid of the dark, afraid of blood, afraid of loud noises. This man sits in the dark and counts. This man sees blood and checks a pulse. This man hears an explosion and determines the distance based on the delay of the sound. Who is he? Artem remained silent. 24 hours. The system will count his silence as a lie in a day's time. He has time. But So-yeon was sitting across from him, with red eyes, with empty hands, without a knife. For the first time, she was without a knife in his presence, and he realized that 24 hours wasn't a gift, it was a trap. If he remained silent now, he'd get 24 hours, but he'd lose what was more important. He told the truth, not all of it, he couldn't tell it all, but enough. He said he wasn't from this world, that he had a different name, that in his world he was a sapper, a man who searches for and diffuses traps buried in the ground. Bombs, mines, devices that kill whoever steps on them. He said he had died, on the road, not in battle. Stupidly, he'd fallen asleep at the wheel and woke up here, in a stranger's body, at a stranger's wedding, with someone else's wife who had warned him not to drink wine. So-yeon listened. Her face was impassive, not a single muscle twitched. When he fell silent, she remained silent for another minute. Then she said one word, "I believe you," and she stood up and went to bed. Artem sat by the hearth. Nothing had changed on his wrist. Trust hadn't grown, it hadn't fallen. He had told the truth, and trust remained where it was. That meant one thing. She believed him. But belief isn't trust. Belief is the mind. Trust is the body. She believed with her mind. Her body was still waiting. The morning of the 16th day, Artem stood in the yard and looked at the path leading out of the village. A horseman was riding along the path. Not a villager. A fine horse, a leather saddle, expensive clothes, a sword at his belt, a real one, not rusty. 2 men on foot followed the horseman, servants or guards. The horseman rode up to the gate. He dismounted. He looked around. He saw the moat, the rampart. He looked at Artem. An intelligent face, cold, eyes like those of a merchant appraising his wares. He introduced himself. Assistant to Magistrate Cho Byung-il. He had arrived following a report from Village Head Park. The charge? Unauthorized construction of fortifications on Crown land. Preparation for rebellion. The demand? To report immediately to the magistrate for an explanation. Artem listened. Then he said that the land wasn't Crown land. It was his land. By decree of the king. He had the key with him. He had the charter with him. Fortifications on his own land did not constitute a rebellion. And if the magistrate wanted an explanation, let him come himself. The assistant turned pale. No one had ever spoken to a representative of the magistrate like that. No one in this village. No one in this county. He said Artem would regret it. Artem replied that he'd already been told that. A week ago. Those 3 with the knives had said the same thing. Then they slunk away. The assistant turned around. He drove off. Artem stood there, watching his back. He was counting. 14 days until the spring review. The magistrate now knows that Artem is alive, knows that the village is well fed, knows that there's a moat and a rampart around the house, knows that the village head's tip-off didn't work out as planned. The magistrate will act. Faster. Harsher. The only question was exactly what. The answer came 2 days later. On the 18th day, a granary caught fire in the village. Not the village headman's old granary, the communal warehouse, the very one that held the 20 sacks of grain Artem had left for the community's needs. Artem was the first to arrive. The fire was intense, dry wood. The roof had already collapsed. The grain was burning. People stood around watching. It was too late to put it out. 20 sacks. Everything he'd left for the village in case of an emergency. Smoke. Ash. The bitter smell of burnt grain. Artem stood there, staring at the fire. Standing nearby was the old woman to whom he'd given the key. She was crying. Quietly. Silently. Artem looked at the ground around the warehouse. Footprints. 2 people. They'd come from the direction of the village headman's house. A stain by the warehouse wall. Oil. They'd doused it, set it on fire, left the same way. He didn't say anything out loud. Everyone knew anyway. Min Ho stood in his yard and watched the fire. His face showed nothing. No joy, no guilt. Emptiness. The emptiness of a man who had long since stopped considering other people to be human. Artem turned and walked toward the village head's house. Min Ho stepped toward him. 4 men followed Min Ho. Villagers. Those who had eaten out of Pak's hand. Artem stopped. He counted. 5 of them. He was alone. His pickaxe was at home. His shovel was at home. He had nothing in his hands. A bad situation. But he didn't back down. He asked Min Ho why. Min Ho said he didn't know what Artem was talking about. Artem said that the oil stains on the warehouse wall led to Min Ho's yard. Min Ho shrugged and said that didn't prove anything. Artem nodded. He said it didn't prove anything, but the court needed evidence, and he had to live to see the trial. It wasn't a threat, it was an observation. Min Ho heard him. The 4 of them exchanged glances. Artem turned around and walked away, back to his house. So Yun was standing by the gate, waiting. She'd seen everything. She said Min Ho wouldn't stop. Artem replied that he knew. She said the next target wouldn't be the warehouse. The next target would be their house. Artem replied that he knew. Then he said the house wouldn't burn down, because stone foundations don't burn, and he'd replace the wooden walls. But not now. Right now, something else was needed. The village had to be standing by the spring festival, not burning. Standing, with people, with food, with a living owner. So Young looked at him and asked how. Artem said he had a plan. He didn't tell her the whole plan, not because he didn't trust her, because it was the kind of plan that only works if only 2 people know about it, him and the one on the other end. He went to see Ga Yul. The pots were ready, 3 of them, thick-walled, with conical necks. Ga Yul hadn't made them out of clay. She'd used a mixture of clay and sand that she'd come up with herself, stronger than usual. Artem took the pots. He examined them. He tapped on the side. The sound was right, solid, not hollow. He told her she'd done a great job. Ga Yul didn't blush. She never blushed at praise. She said she'd made a 4th one, a bigger one, with a double bottom, so the charge could be divided into 2 chambers. Artem looked at the 4th pot. He looked at Ga Yul. He asked how she knew about the double charge. She said she didn't know. She just thought that if the expansion goes in one direction, you could start with a small push and then a big one. Like 2 hammer blows. The first creates a crack. The second creates a breach. Artem stood there looking at the blacksmith's 17-year-old daughter, who had just invented a staged cumulative charge. Without a textbook, without theory, purely from intuition. He told her she needed to go down to the basement. Ga Yul raised an eyebrow. He said there were inscriptions down there that neither he nor So-yeon could read, but that she might be able to. Ga Yul asked why her. Artem said it was because her grandfather had been the clan's master armorer who had built what lay down there. Ga Yul froze. Then she said that her grandfather had died when she was 3 years old, that her father had never talked about his work. Only once had he said that her grandfather didn't make weapons for people, but weapons made of stone. She thought it was a metaphor. Artem said it wasn't a metaphor. That evening, Artem took Gayul to the basement. So-yeon walked ahead, in silence. She didn't approve, but she didn't forbid it either. Trust level 25. Enough not to forbid it, not enough to approve of it. Gayul went downstairs. She saw the first warrior. She stopped. She looked at it for a minute. Then she walked over to the wall, to the symbols. She traced the lines with her finger. Artem watched. So-yeon watched. Gayul read, slowly, syllable by syllable, like a child who is learning but already knows the letters. She said it wasn't a language. It was a diagram. An engineering diagram. Recorded in symbols that were both words and blueprints. Each symbol was both an instruction and a component. She said the first line described the material, not stone, an alloy, stone and metal, and a third thing that has no name in this language. She said the second line describes the activation mechanism, not magic, resonance, a vibration of a specific frequency transmitted through the seal. The two bearers of the seal must simultaneously touch the warrior and utter the word. One word, the same word, at the same moment. Artem and So-yeon exchanged glances, the first glance in 16 days that conveyed understanding rather than tension. 2 keys, 1 door. They went upstairs. Ga-u brought up the rear. She stopped by the stairs. She turned to the 10 warriors, then to Artem. She said that if they gave her time, she would read everything, every symbol, every line, every diagram, because this was what she was born to do. Artem nodded. So-yeon nodded. Their first shared nod. A small one, but genuine. On the 19th day, Artem woke up to a knock. Not on the door, on the gate. Insistent, steady. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. He went outside. Min-ji was standing at the gate. The Cho clan's assassin. The very same woman who, 10 days ago, had sat in his room with a blade in her hand. She looked different, not in black, in a gray travel cloak. Her hood was thrown back. Her face was visible. Young, sharp features, a scar across her left eyebrow. She said she hadn't come to kill. Artem asked why she was there then. She said he was right. She had returned to the clan after failing her mission. They'd given her 3 days to try again. If both were still alive in 3 days, they'd send someone else, for her and for them. Artem said that was to be expected. She said she'd left. Not the clan. You don't leave the clan. She simply hadn't returned. It was the same as death, only slower. Artem looked at her, assessing her. 22 years old, thin, lean. Her movements were economical, not a single unnecessary one. A professional, trained since childhood. He asked what she wanted. She said she wanted a roof over her head, food, and the chance not to wake up every morning thinking about who she had to kill that day. Artem opened the gate. So-yeon was standing behind him. She saw Min-ji. She remembered the blade at her throat. She remembered that night. Artem turned to face her. He didn't ask. He just looked at her. So-yeon was silent for 5 seconds. Then she stepped away from the door. She cleared the way. It wasn't forgiveness. It was permission. Minimal, but sufficient. Min-ji entered the courtyard. She stopped. She looked at the moat, at the rampart, at the house, then at Artem. She said she had information. The Cho clan knows about the house, not about the basement, about the widow. They want So-yeon, alive. They need her blood for something they haven't told her. She's just a pawn. She was just a foot soldier. But she knows something else. She knows the layout of the Cho clan's estate, every corridor, every room, every secret passage, because she grew up there. Artem didn't ask how she ended up in the clan. Not now. He made a mental note. The secrets file. Line 2. By evening, there were 5 of them in the house. Artem, Soyeon, Dahi, Minji, and Gaul, who came down to the basement every day and read the walls for 3 hours. It was cramped, there wasn't much food, but they were alive. On the 20th day, Artem began preparing the village for the inspection. 10 days. 10 days before the king arrived with the magistrate and saw what was happening here. Artem had to demonstrate 3 things. First, the village was alive and paying its taxes. Second, the landowner was alive and capable of acting. Third, his wife was by his side and their marriage was valid. There was a problem with the first one. Tax in grain. 20 sacks. The very ones that burned in the warehouse. No grain, no tax. No tax, execution. Artem sat by the hearth and counted. Soyeon sat next to him. Not across from him, next to him, an arm's length away. She said there was a clearing in the forest behind the house. Wild barley grows in the clearing. Not much, but if they gathered it, they could fill 5 sacks. Artem asked how she knew. She said she'd gone there for 5 years when Hae-jin took her share of food. The forest fed her when her husband didn't. Artem stood up. He took the sacks. They went into the forest, just the 2 of them. The first time the 2 of them had been outside the house together. The clearing was a half-hour walk away. Small, overgrown. The barley was wild and tough, but it was grain. They harvested for 4 hours. Their hands were scratched by the ears of grain. Their backs ached. They filled 3 sacks. Not enough. They needed 20. On the way back, Soyeon walked beside him, closer than usual. Their shoulders almost touched. She said the villagers could help. After what Artem had done to the village head's barn, he had people who would follow him into the woods. Artem nodded. The next day, he led 12 people out to the clearing. Men, women, an old woman from the house at the far end, a fatherless teenager. They gathered barley all day. By evening, they had 10 sacks. Another day, 15. Another, 18. On the 23rd day, Artem had 18 sacks of wild barley. Not 20, but 18. A difference of 2 sacks. Whether that's critical or not depends on who's doing the counting. Artem decided he'd figure it out later. Because on the 23rd day, something else happened. Ha-eun came again. Not alone. With a bruise on her cheek. Fresh. Purple. She stood at the gate and said nothing. Artem went out. He looked at the bruise. He didn't ask who did it. He knew. Ha-eun said her father had found out she'd come to warn him about the denunciation. Someone had seen her. Someone had told on her. She said her father had locked her in the house for 3 days. Then he let her out and said that if she came near Artem's house one more time, he'd marry her off to Minho that very day. She said this in an even voice, no tears, no tremor. The voice of someone reporting the weather. Artem opened the gate. She walked in. Soyeon was standing in the doorway. She saw the bruise. Her expression didn't change, but she did something she'd never done before. She reached out and touched Ha-eun's cheek, gently, with her fingertips. Ha-eun froze. Then her face broke, like glass, and she began to cry. For the first time in front of them. For the first time, perhaps, in years. Soyeon didn't hug her. She didn't say everything would be all right. She just stood there beside her, resting her hand on her cheek. Artem watched them and thought about how this house on the edge of the village, by the forest, with a skinny horse and 5 chickens, had somehow become the only place within a 100-kilometer radius where you could cry without getting hit for it. Ha-eun stayed. She didn't leave. She said she wouldn't go back. She said her father could do whatever he wanted. Soyeon nodded. Once. That was her complete answer. On the 24th day, Artem gathered everyone together. 5 of them. Artem, Soyeon, Dahi, Minji, Ha-eun. Gaul came from the village and became the 6th. He spread out a map on the floor, drawn with charcoal on cloth. A map of the village. a map of the house, a map of the basement, a defense plan. He said the king would arrive in 6 days. With him would be Magistrate Cho Byung-il and mercenaries, possibly soldiers. The king will come to see if the landowner is alive. The magistrate will come to make sure he isn't. These are 2 different visits in one. Artem said that by the time the king arrives, he needs the village to look as if people live here, not ghosts. The roofs are patched. The fences are standing. Smoke is coming from the chimneys. Children are in the street. Food is on the table. 18 sacks of grain in the storeroom. Not 20, but 18. He said he needed one from each of them. Suyeon, to stand nearby. The landlord's wife. Not in mourning red, in white. Suyeon looked at him. For a long time. She had worn the red dress for 5 years. Mourning her father. Not her husband, her father. Taking off the red means ending the mourning. It means letting go. She didn't say anything, but she didn't refuse either. Da-hee, stand as a doctor. A village with a doctor is a village that stands. The king will appreciate that. Min-ji, stay out of sight. If anyone from the magistrate's entourage recognizes the face of the Cho clan's assassin standing next to Artem, it's over. Min-ji nodded. She knows how to be invisible. Ha-un, keep an eye on the village head. Every step, every conversation. If Park tries to whisper something to the magistrate, Artem must know in advance. Ga-il, prepare 3 pots. Load them. Gunpowder in the correct proportions. Fuses. Place them around the perimeter of the house. Not for attack, for defense, in case the magistrate decides it's easier to kill the host at night before the review than to wait until morning. Ga-yul nodded. Her face was serious. Her hands were steady. She was no longer the blacksmith's daughter. She had become an engineer. Artem looked at them. 6 people. 3 weeks ago, he had been alone in a stranger's body at a stranger's wedding. Now there were 6. Not an army, not a squad, a family. A strange one, a broken one. Pieced together from shards, but a family. He said they had 6 days. 6 days to make the village look alive. 6 days to make 18 sacks seem enough. 6 days for the king to leave while they remained standing. The 6 days passed as if they were one. The village was bustling with activity, for the first time in years. The men patched roofs, the women repaired fences, the children hauled firewood. Artem went from yard to yard, showing them what to do. He didn't give orders, he showed them. There's a difference. A commander says, do it. An engineer says, watch, and does it himself. Then they repeat after him. Soyeon walked with him, silently, but close by. People saw them together. That was more important than any words. The master and the mistress, together. Not by order, but in step. Min-ji had disappeared from view. Artem knew she was somewhere nearby, on the roof, in a tree, around the corner. He sensed her presence the way one senses a draft. She was watching. Ha-un kept an eye on the village headman. Every evening she came and reported. The village headman wrote. A lot. A new letter every day. He sent them with his son. Minho rode to the highway and handed them to a mounted messenger. Ha-un couldn't read what was in the letters, but she remembered something. One of the letters bore a seal. Not the village head seal, another one. A family seal. Ha-un described it. Min-ji, sitting in the shadows by the wall, turned pale. She said it was the seal of the Cho clan, not the magistrates, the clan itself, the main branch, the one in the capital. Ha-un asked how she knew. Min-ji didn't answer. Artem made a note. The threats file, a new entry. Village Head Park isn't just a petty thief. He's a liaison between the village and the Cho clan, between the magistrate's office and the capital. A web. Artem began to see the web. On the 27th day, Ga-il brought the pots. 3 were loaded. gunpowder inside, fuses made of waxed rope. The fourth had a double charge. Artem examined each one, checked the proportions. 3 to 1 to 1. Correct. He crumpled the fuses. Dry, even. They burn for 3 seconds per finger's length. He tested it. Lit a scrap. Counted. 3. Exactly. Ga-il stood nearby, waiting for his assessment. Artem said it was perfect. She didn't smile. She just nodded. Like a master who knows his work is good but doesn't need confirmation. He placed the pots, 2 on the north side of the house, on either side of the path from the forest, 1 by the gate. He left the 4th one with a double charge in the basement, by the first door, just in case. On the evening of the 28th, So-yeon came out of her room. She was wearing a white dress, simple, clean, no red. She stood in the doorway and looked at Artem. 5 years of red mourning, and now white. Artem looked at her. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. She'd done it herself. For herself. Not for him, not for the council. For herself. Because you can't carry the dead with you forever, especially those who don't deserve mourning. Da-hee saw her and whistled softly. Min-ji peered out from the shadows and tilted her head slightly. Ha-eun pressed her palms to her lips. Ga-ul said that white suited her better than red. So-yeon didn't say anything, but the corner of her mouth twitched, by a millimeter, upward. The 29th day, the last one before the inspection. Artem stood on the roof of the house. He was patching up the last hole. From up there, he could see the whole village, smoke rising from the chimneys. The fences were still standing. The roofs were intact. People were walking around. Children were running. Not perfect, but alive. On the road leading from the highway to the village, a column of dust. Far away, a cavalry unit. Tomorrow. They'll be here tomorrow. Artem climbed down from the roof. He gathered everyone in the house, one last time before the inspection. He said they needed to be ready for anything tomorrow. The king might be merciful. He might be cruel. The magistrate would be looking for a reason. The village head would be whispering. Artem had to stand his ground and hold firm. So-yeon must stand by his side. The rest must remain unseen but ready. He said there was something he hadn't told them. About Kim Tae-hyun's diary. About Hae-jin's betrayal. He asked Da-hee for permission to use the diary if necessary. Da-hee said that was exactly what the diary was for. Artem nodded. He put the diary in his inside pocket next to the house key. 2 documents. One gave him the right to the house. The other gave him the right to the truth. The night of the 30th day. No one was sleeping. Artem sat by the door. So-yeon sat by the hearth. Da-hee was checking the medications. Min-ji had disappeared. Ga-ul had gone home, but Artem knew she wasn't asleep. Ha-eun lay on a mat with her eyes open, listening to the night. Silence. Not a breath of wind. Not a sound. Even the rooster was silent. Artem closed his eyes. He didn't sleep. He was counting. 30 days. Trust level 25. 18 sacks out of 20. 3 targeted charges and 1 double charge. 1 diary containing proof of betrayal. 5 women who trust him. 1 village that doesn't stab him in the back. 1 cellar with 11 stone warriors who sleep and wait for the word. Against him stand the king, the magistrate, the Cho clan, the village elder, and someone else he cannot yet see but can sense, just as one senses a mine buried too neatly. Morning, dawn, fog, and a sound. Hooves, many of them. Artem stepped out onto the porch. A detachment was riding down the road toward the village. A banner led the way. The royal one, gold on black. Behind it, horsemen, 20, maybe 25. In the center, a palanquin, a heavy one, 4 horses. Behind the palanquin, another detachment, in different colors. Dark blue, the Cho clan. Artem counted 25 royal horsemen, 15 Cho men, A total of 40 horsemen, plus the servants, plus those inside the palanquin, against a single sapper with a pickaxe and 3 clay pots. The math doesn't add up. But math isn't everything. Artem straightened up. He ran his hand over his face, wiped away the sweat, then smoothed his hair. Then he did something he hadn't done in 30 days. He smiled. So-yeon stepped out onto the porch, dressed in white. She stood beside him. Their shoulders touched. She didn't pull away. Artem said 2 words to her. "We're ready." She didn't answer, but she stood there, right beside him, and that was her answer. The king was small. That was the first thing Artem noticed. A small man in a large palanquin. His face was narrow, his eyes were intelligent, cold. He stepped out of the palanquin and stood on the ground of the village square as if the whole world were his floor. Behind him came Magistrate Cho Byung-il, tall, lean. His face was like an axe. Thin lips, a gaze that didn't look but cut. Next to him stood a young man, about 18 years old, dressed in fine clothes. His face resembled the king's but was softer. The crown prince. And behind the prince was a smaller palanquin, closed. No one came out of it. But Artem noticed the curtain flutter. Someone was watching. The village lined up along the road, 30 people, standing, silent, watching. Artem stood at the front. So-yeon was beside him, dressed in white, back straight, gaze steady. Village headman Park stood to the side. He bowed so low that his forehead almost touched the ground. Min-ho was behind him. He was bowing too, but his eyes darted about. The king stopped in front of Artem. He looked up at him. Artem was a head taller, but the small man in the palanquin knew how to look at him in such a way that height didn't matter. The king said he was glad to see Private Han Jae-woo alive. His voice was even, neither ironic nor warm, just a statement of fact. Artem bowed, not deeply as befits a landowner, not like a slave. The king noticed this. Magistrate Cho stepped forward. He said he had a complaint against the landowner. Unauthorized construction of fortifications, embezzlement of communal grain, preparation for a rebellion. Artem stood and listened. So-yeon stood and listened. When the magistrate finished, Artem spoke, calmly, without emotion, just as the report stated. He said that the land belonged to him by royal decree. He had the key with him. He had the charter with him. He showed both. He said the fortifications had been erected to protect his property, because on the very first night of his stay, 3 armed men had broken into the house with the intent to kill him. He said that the community's grain had not been stolen but returned. 173 sacks from village head Pak's granary had been returned to the villagers. Pak turned pale. The magistrate frowned. The king turned to the village head. He asked if this was true. Pak began to speak, quickly, confusingly, that the grain was his own, that he had hoarded it, that Artem had stolen it. Artem didn't interrupt. He waited. When Pak fell silent, Artem said one thing. He asked the king if they could check the village's communal register. The register records how much grain was harvested from the communal fields and how much was distributed to the villagers. If Pak was telling the truth, the register would show that the grain was his. If not, it would show that he had stolen it. Pak turned even paler. He kept the register, and the register contained exactly what was written there. The king nodded. He ordered the register to be brought. Min-ho ran off. He returned with a book, thick and greasy. The king didn't read it himself. He handed it to his assistant. The assistant read for 5 minutes. Then he looked up and said that, according to the register, the communal stockpile amounted to 200 sacks. 0 had been distributed to the residents. The remainder should be in the communal warehouse. 200 sacks, 0 distributed. The warehouse was empty. But there were 173 in the village headman's granary. Arithmetic. The king looked at Pak. Pak opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, said nothing. Magistrate Cho stood nearby. His face was impassive, but Artem saw his fingers clench. His man had failed. In public, in front of the king. This was worse than just a failure. It was a disgrace. Artem didn't press the village head any further. It wasn't the right time. Instead, he led the king through the village. He showed him the courtyards, the repaired roofs, the intact fences, smoke rising from the chimneys, children, women, elderly people, alive, well-fed. He showed him the communal warehouse. 18 sacks. The king counted them. He said there were supposed to be 20. Artem said there had been 20 sacks in the warehouse, but the warehouse had been set on fire on the 18th day. The grain had burned. He pointed to the remains of the warehouse, the charred walls, the oil stains, the footprints. The king looked at Artem, then at the village head, then at the magistrate. He said nothing. He returned to the square. He sat down in the chair they had set out for him, and he began to speak. His voice was quiet, steady, but every word was like a stone. He said that the landowner was alive. His wife was with him. The village still stood. The tax was incomplete, but the cause had been determined. The landowner was acquitted. Village head Pak was removed from office. The register is to be handed over to the new village head, whom the landowner will appoint. Pak fell to his knees and began to beg. The king did not look at him. Magistrate Cho stood there in silence. His plan had collapsed, but he was not a man of a single plan. Artem saw his eyes. His next move was already being calculated there. Then something happened that no one had expected. The curtain of the small palanquin parted. A woman stepped out, 44 years old, tall, upright. Her face was both beautiful and stern. Her clothes were not ceremonial but expensive, simple, the kind of simplicity that only true power can afford. Queen Mother Sun Hui Ran. The square fell silent. The magistrate turned. The king turned. The prince turned. Everyone turned. She didn't look at any of them. She walked across the square, straight ahead, toward one person, toward So-yun. So-yun was standing next to Artem. Her face was pale. Her hands were at her sides. She was looking at the woman walking toward her. And Artem saw how her face changed. It wasn't recognition. No, something deeper, as if her body had remembered what her mind had forgotten. The Queen Mother stopped in front of So-yun, a step away. She looked into her face, for a long time. Then she raised her hand and placed it on So-yun's shoulder. Gently, the way you place a hand on the shoulder of a child you'd lost and found again. And she said one word. Niece. Silence. Absolute silence. Magistrate Cho turned white. Not pale. White. Like paper. Like a wall. Like the snow behind him. So-yun stood there. She didn't move. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She held her ground. The king looked at his mother, then at So-yun, then at Artem. And for the first time all day, something other than coldness appeared in his gaze. Surprise. Quiet. Genuine. He didn't know. The king didn't know who So-yun was. His own mother hadn't told him for 20 years. Magistrate Cho turned and walked toward his horse, quickly. His entourage followed him, 15 men in dark blue. Artem watched their backs. He counted. The magistrate was leaving. This wasn't a retreat. It was a pause. He would return, with more forces, with a different plan. But today he had lost. The Queen Mother stood next to So-yun. She turned toward Artem. She looked at him, calmly, appraisingly, the way one looks at a person they've been waiting for. She said it was good, that he was alive, that the village was intact, that his wife was by his side. She didn't explain why this mattered to her, not in front of others. Artem bowed. She tilted her head slightly in response. The king stood up. He announced that the review was over. The lord of the land had been confirmed. An investigation was ordered for the village elder. The village was fine. He got into the palanquin. He left. The Queen Mother followed him. Before getting in, she turned around. She looked at Artem, and she said quietly, so that only he and So-yun could hear, In 60 days, I'll be waiting for you in the capital. The curtain closed, the palanquin set off. Dust on the road, silence. Artem stood in the square. So-yun was beside him. The village all around, alive, intact, standing firm. 30 days. He had survived. They had survived. On his wrist, a warm and steady sensation. Trust level 30. And immediately after, another sensation. Cold, sharp, like an electric shock. Lines in his head, clear, red. The third door is open. Attention. The first warrior has been awakened without your order. Artem froze. So-yun froze. They looked at each other, then down, at their feet. A sound came from beneath the ground, heavy, stone-like. One step, a pause, a second step. Something down there had awakened on its own, without an order, without a word, without their permission. So-yun grabbed Artem by the hand, for the first time, not by the wrist, by the hand. Her fingers were cold, her grip was ironclad. Artem didn't let go. A third step came from below. They went down to the basement a minute later. So-yun in front, Artem behind her, their hands still clasped. She wouldn't let go. He wouldn't let go. The first hall, the statue was still there. Its eye was slightly open. The light was blue, unchanging. The second hall, 10 warriors in a row, standing, their eyes closed, asleep. But the passage behind them had widened. Before, it was a crack. Now, a doorway. They walked on, steps leading down, steep, worn. The air was colder, drier, heavier. Artem counted the steps. 32. Then a landing. Then another 20. Then a corridor. Long, stretching ahead. The walls here were different. Not just stone. Stone veined with something dark. Metal, or something that had once been metal. The veins pulsed, faintly, like blood in thin veins. The third hall opened up suddenly. Artem stepped inside and stopped. So-yun stopped beside him. The hall was enormous. The ceiling soared 10 meters high. The walls formed a semicircle, and warriors stood along the walls. Artem counted. 10 rows of 10. 100. 100 stone warriors, 3 meters tall, with swords, with shields, with spears, with bows. Different weapons, different sizes, but their closed eyes were all the same sleep. All except one, the first in the front row. He wasn't standing like the others, not upright. Slightly bent over, like a person who had just gotten out of bed and wasn't fully awake yet. His eyes were open, both of them, wide open. A blue light shone from them like 2 lanterns. He was looking straight ahead, at the wall, not at them. Artem stood there, staring at the awakened warrior. The sapper's eye was active. His joints were moving. The fingers of his right hand were gripping the sword. Not a statue, a mechanism. Active, functioning. He asked So-yun what it meant. She replied that she didn't know. This had never happened before. Never. Warriors don't wake up on their own. Warriors wait for a word. 2 keys, 1 door. Without a word, there is no awakening. Artem approached the warrior, slowly, step by step. So-yun didn't let go of his hand. She walked beside him. The warrior didn't turn around, didn't look at them. He stood there, staring at the wall. There was a carving on the wall. Artem looked closer. It wasn't just a carving, it was a map. The same map as on the second level, but larger, more detailed, and there was something new on it. Lines, red ones, running from the village in 4 directions. At the ends of the lines were dots. 4 dots, 4 locations. So-yun read the inscriptions next to the dots. Her voice trembled. She said they were seals. The 4 outer seals, the ones that hold the perimeter, the ones that prevent the army from getting out, even if the central seal weakens. 4 locks on a single door. And 3 of the 4 on the map were crossed out, with a red line. Crossed out, broken. Artem looked at the map. 3 out of 4. 1 remained. 1 seal out of 4. That's why the warrior woke up on his own, not because the system malfunctioned, because the system issues a warning. When only 1 lock remains out of 4, the door begins to open slightly. And the first warrior stands because he is the sentry, not a soldier, a sentry, an alarm clock. He stood to tell those sleeping upstairs that time is running out. So-yeon stood and looked at the map. Her hand, clasped in Artem's, was trembling, slightly, like a leaf in the wind. She said that 3 seals were intact when her father died. 7 years ago. 3 were intact. Now 3 are broken. Over the course of 7 years, someone broke the 3 outer seals. Not time, not wear and tear. Someone. On purpose. Intentionally. Artem led her away from the wall. They sat down on the floor, in a hall with 100 sleeping warriors and 1 awake. Cold. Silence. Blue light. He thought, 3 seals are broken. 1 remains. If the last one is broken, the army will begin to wake up. All of it. 8,142 warriors. Uncontrolled. Without orders. Without a key. Just like 300 years ago when they stopped distinguishing between their own and strangers. Who would want that? The Cho clan wants So-yeon and her blood. But why break the seals? They want to control the army, not release it. So it's not the Cho clan. Or not just the Cho clan. Artem recalled words from the lore of his new life. Words he'd heard at the market, on the roads, and in the villagers' conversations. The returners. The sect. The priestly academy. Those who believe the army must be fully awakened, to purge the kingdom of the unworthy, to start over, from scratch. They were the ones breaking the seals. Artem stood up. He helped So-yeon to her feet. She looked like someone who had glanced at the clock and realized she was late. Not for a meeting, for life. He told her they'd manage. She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But she didn't let go of his hand. They went upstairs. Dahi was waiting by the basement door. She saw their faces. She didn't ask any questions. She just took out a flask of water. She gave it to So-yeon, then to Artem. Minji was sitting on the roof. She came down. She looked at them. She said that while they were downstairs, a man had approached the house. Just one. Not from the village. Not from the king's entourage. Not one of Cho's men. A stranger. He stood by the ditch. He looked at the house for 5 minutes. Then he left. Toward the forest. Artem asked what he looked like. Minji described him. Middle-aged. Of average height. Plain clothes. Nothing remarkable. Except for one thing. A symbol around his neck. Small. Made of stone. On a cord. So-yeon heard the description of the symbol and her face turned ashen. She said it was the symbol of the priestly academy. An old one. Not a modern one. The one used before the reform. Before the academy was rebuilt and everyone who believed in the awakening was expelled. The returnees. They know where the house is. They know who's inside. They know the seals are weakening. And they came to take a look. Artem stood in the yard. He looked at the forest, at the village, at the sky. 30 days have passed. He survived. The village stands. The king has left. The magistrate has left. So-yeon is by his side. But the war isn't over. The war hasn't even begun. Everything that's happened so far has been reconnaissance, a trial run, a test. The real thing begins now. 60 days to the capital. 3 broken seals. 1 intact. A sect that seeks awakening. A clan that thirsts for blood. A king who doesn't know that beneath his kingdom lies an army capable of wiping him off the face of the earth. and a woman by his side who, for the first time in 5 years, is holding someone's hand. Artem turned toward the house. Everyone was looking at him. So-yeon, Da-hee, Min-ji. Ha-eun stood in the doorway. Ga-eul had run in from the village with her hands smeared with soot. He said they had 60 days, that the capital lay ahead, that the magistrate would return with an army, that the sect would return for the seal, that the Cho clan would return for So-yeon, and that he needed every one of them. Not as soldiers, as people. Because the system beneath their feet operates not on force, but on trust. And the only way to keep the 8,000 stone warriors from awakening is through 2 people who trust each other. Truly. Without orders, without coercion, without a rusty key pressed into their palms. He didn't say any fancy words. He didn't promise victory. He didn't promise safety. He told the truth. It will be hard. It will be scary. Some may not return. But he will build a home. Not a fortress, a home. One where she'll stop sleeping with a knife under her pillow. He didn't specify who she was. Everyone understood. On his wrist, it felt warm, steady. He looked. Trust level 30. It hadn't gone up, nor had it gone down. But in the reflection of the tattoo on his skin, he saw something new. The lines had become brighter, sharper, like a sketch turning from a rough draft into a blueprint. Silence below. The stone sentry stood below with his eyes open, waiting. The army slept. The seals held. For now. On the porch, So-yeon stood watching the sunset, dressed in white, empty-handed, without a knife. Artem stood beside her. Their shoulders touched. She didn't pull away. He didn't pull away. The first day of the new war was over. 59 more lay ahead. On the 3rd day after the review, Artem went down to the basement with Ga-yeol. So-yeon stayed upstairs. She said she needed time. Artem didn't argue. Time is the only thing that can't be rushed. Ga-yeol worked for 6 hours straight. She read the walls of the 3rd hall, symbol by symbol, line by line. Artem sat nearby and wrote down on a piece of cloth what she was translating. Schemes for awakening, schemes for putting to sleep, schemes for repairing the seals. The 4 outer seals are located at 4 points around the village, north, south, east, and west. Each is about 10 li from the house. Each consists of a stone pillar driven into the ground and covered by a mound. 3 have been destroyed. The western one remains. Ga-yeol found something else. Restoration instructions. The seal can be restored, not through magic, but through engineering. It requires a material identical to that of the warriors, stone with metallic veins. A mold is needed, an exact copy of the destroyed pillar. And 2 seal carriers are needed. Simultaneously. At a single point. With a single word. Artem wrote it down. The formula. Material plus mold plus 2 keys. Like an equation. Like a bomb disposal problem in reverse. Not to defuse, but to arm. Not to defuse, but to activate. He went upstairs. Da-hee was sitting by the hearth, mending Min-ji's jacket. Min-ji was standing by the window, looking out at the forest. Ha-eun was washing rice. An ordinary evening, an ordinary house. Except that 8,000 stone soldiers were sleeping under the floor, and one was already awake. Artem sat down and told them what he'd found out. The 3 seals could be restored, but to do that, they had to get to them. The northern seal was 10 li to the north, in the forest. The southern seal was 10 li to the south, in the foothills. The eastern seal was 10 li to the east, on the riverbank. Each one was destroyed. Each one must be restored. And for each one, the 2 of them are needed, he and So-yeon. Min-ji said it was a trap to lure both of them out of the house, leaving it defenseless. Artem said he knew, but they had no choice. If they didn't restore the seals, the army would wake up, all of it, and then the house wouldn't help. No one's house would help. Dahi asked how much time they had. Artem said he didn't know for sure. Kyle thinks the sentry downstairs is an indicator. When the second one wakes up, it means there's not much time left. When the third one does, it means days. When the 10th one does, it means hours. So far, there's only one. That means there's still time, but not forever. On the 5th day after the inspection, they set out for the northern seal. Artem, Soyeon, Minji as a guard. 3 hours through the forest. Winter, bare, snow up to their knees. Minji walked ahead, silently, checking the trail. Soyeon walked beside Artem, in silence. They arrived. A burial mound. A small hill in the middle of the forest, weathered by time. There was a hole at the top. Artem climbed down. Inside was a stone pillar, or rather, what was left of it. Split in two, cleanly, neatly. Not by time, by a tool. Someone had come and split it, recently. The marks on the stone were fresh, not 7 years, maybe a year, maybe 2. Artem examined the fragments. The material was the same as that used by the warriors. Veined stone, heavy, dense. He gathered the pieces, fitted them together, like a puzzle. The pillar was 1.5 meters tall and 30 centimeters in diameter. A cylinder, with carvings on the surface. Symbols similar to those in the basement. Could they be glued back together? No, it can't be. A crack ran through the center, through the core. A new pillar is needed. Material is needed. Gail is needed to interpret its form. A forge capable of working with this stone is needed. They returned. Artem went to Gail. He showed her the fragment he'd brought with him. Gail took it. She turned it over in her hands. She tapped it with a hammer. She weighed it in her palm. She said it wasn't stone or metal. It was both. An alloy she'd never seen before. But her grandfather had told her about it. A long time ago, when she was 3. He said there was a stone that sang if heated just right. And if it sang, it meant it was alive. If it was silent, it meant it was dead. She placed the fragment in the forge. She stoked the fire. She waited. 5 minutes. 10. 20. The fragment didn't melt. It didn't turn red. It didn't change. But at the 20th minute, it began to make a sound. A quiet hum. A low one. The very same one Artem had heard when he pressed his ear against the foundation. Gail removed the fragment from the fire. She placed it on the anvil. She struck it. Once. The fragment didn't split, but a wave rippled through it from the blow, like on water. The stone moved. It deformed. For a second, it became soft. Then it froze solid again. Gail raised her head. Her eyes were ablaze. She said she could work with it. All she needed to do was heat it properly and strike at the right moment, when it sang. Artem asked how long it would take to make a pillar 1.5 meters by 30 centimeters. Gail thought for a moment. She said that if there was enough material and if she worked every day, it would take 3 weeks for 1 pillar. 3 pillars, 9 weeks, more than 60 days. Not enough time. Artem sat there and did the math. 9 weeks for 3 pillars. 60 days until they reached the capital. It didn't add up. They needed to go faster. Or they needed another solution. He asked Gail if it was possible to make 2 pillars at the same time. She said no. 1 furnace, 1 hammer, just her. Artem thought. Then he asked, what if we don't make new pillars? What if we repair the old ones, glue them together? Not physically, through resonance, through that same vibration. If the stone softens when it sings, then maybe 2 pieces could become 1 if they sing together. Gail froze. Then her expression changed. She said it might work. If both pieces were heated simultaneously until the moment they began to sing, and at that moment pressed together. Like welding. Stone welding. Artem nodded. Stone welding. He was a sapper. She was an engineer. Together, they had just invented a process that hadn't existed in this world for 300 years. They had to test it. Artem brought the fragment down to the basement. Gayul came downstairs. So Young did too. They placed the fragment next to the base of the first stone warrior. Gayul heated the fragment with a portable furnace she'd built from a clay pot and bellows. 20 minutes. The fragment began to sing, softly. And at that very moment, the first stone warrior upstairs sang in response. Resonance. The rumble traveled through the entire basement, through the walls, through the floor, through the ceiling. Upstairs, the dishes rattled. It's working. Soyeon stood there listening. Her tattoo on her wrist glowed. Dimly, blue. She raised her hand. She looked at it. Then she looked at Artem. His tattoo was glowing too. They looked at each other. In the semi-darkness of the basement, in the blue light, 2 keys, 1 door. She said quietly that if he hadn't come, she would have died here alone, with a knife in her hand, with 8,000 dead bodies under the floor, and no one would ever have known. Artem replied that he was here, and he wasn't going anywhere. She didn't smile, but her eyes grew warmer. By a degree, by half a degree. Enough. On the 10th day after the inspection, they repaired the northern seal. Artem, Soyeon, Gayul with the portable furnace, Min-ji on guard duty. Dahi brought the medical supplies. Ha-eun stayed at the house to keep watch. They carried the fragments of the furnaces and bellows through the winter forest for 3 hours. They set up camp in a burial mound. Gayul heated both halves of the pillar at the same time. This required 2 furnaces. She made the second one at night, from the same double-charged pot that had never been needed at the review. 20 minutes of heating. The stone began to sing. Both halves. Artem and Soyeon stood on either side. They pressed the halves together. The stone was warm, alive. It vibrated beneath their palms. Soyeon spoke a word. Artem spoke the same one. At the same time. An ancient word that Gayul had found on the basement wall. A word that meant not a command, but a request. Hold on. The stone shuddered. The crack closed. Slowly, like a wound healing, the 2 halves became one whole. The pillar stood, whole. The carvings on its surface glowed, dimly, blue. And 10 li to the south, in the basement beneath the house, the stone sentinel lowered his sword by 2 centimeters. Artem felt it, through his tattoo, like an echo. 1 seal out of 4 has been restored. 2 out of 4 are working. 2 are broken. Better. Not good, but better. They returned by evening, tired, wet from the snow. Soyeon walked beside Artem. Their hands didn't touch, but the distance between them was a palm's width. Not a meter, a palm's width. The next day, news arrived. Ha-eun reported that Min-ho had left the village, at night, on his father's horse. Destination unknown. Min-ji said that was bad. Min-ho had either gone to the magistrate or to someone even worse. Artem agreed, but there was no way to stop him. You can't lock people up in the village. It's not a fortress. For now. On the 12th day after the review, they set out for the southern seal, the foothills. A 4-hour journey. The road was rougher, rocks, ice, wind. Soyeon slipped on an icy slope. Artem grabbed her by the hand. He held her. She hung over the cliff for 3 seconds. Rocks below, 10 meters. Death. He pulled her back up. She lay on the edge, breathing, fast, ragged. He sat beside her, held her hand, didn't let go. She looked at him. Her eyes were wet. Not from pain, from the fact that someone had caught her, that someone was holding her, that someone hadn't let her go. Her wrist felt warm. Trust level 35. They repaired the southern seal by sunset. The process was the same. Heating, resonance, the word, the crack closed. 3 out of 4 are working. 1 is broken, the eastern one, on the riverbank. Artem wanted to go the next day. Soyeon said she couldn't. Her body couldn't take it. She was exhausted. 5 years of malnutrition, 7 years without real rest. Her body was working at its limit. Dahi examined her. She said she needed at least 3 days of rest. Otherwise, she'd collapse. Artem didn't argue. 3 days. On the 15th day after the inspection, Min-ho returned. He wasn't alone. 12 horsemen arrived with him. Not mercenaries, soldiers, in uniform, wearing the county's colors, men of Magistrate Cho Byung-il. They set up camp at the entrance to the village. They didn't enter. They didn't attack. They just stood there and waited. Artem stood on the roof of the house and watched. 12, plus Min-ho, 13. Against him were So-yeon, Da-hee, Min-ji, Ha-eun, Ga-ul, and 24 villagers who might stand by his side. Or maybe not. Maybe they'd scatter. He went downstairs. He gathered his people. 5 women in one room. 6 if you count him. He said the soldiers wouldn't attack in the open. These were county troops, not bandits. They must have an order, a warrant, an official document. Without a document, they wouldn't enter a house approved by the king. Min-ji said the document could be forged. Artem said it was possible, but it would take time, a day or 2. They'd stand there and keep the pressure on, waiting for a mistake, waiting for one of the villagers to break down and open the gate, or for Artem to step outside so they could capture him on the road. He said they needed to repair the eastern seal right now, while the soldiers were still stationed at the village and not at his house. So-yeon said she wasn't ready. Her body was still weak. Da-hee said that if So-yeon went now, she might not make it back. Artem looked at So-yeon. She looked at him. She said she'd go. He said no, not in that condition. She said they had no choice. Every day without the 4th seal is a day closer to the awakening. She stood up. She staggered. Da-hee steadied her. Artem stepped forward. He took her by the shoulders. He looked into her eyes. He said he wouldn't lose her for the sake of the seal. The seal could be repaired tomorrow. She couldn't be repaired. So-yeon was silent. Then she said quietly that no one had ever said anything like that to her, that she was more important than duty, more important than the mission, more important than 8,000. Artem didn't answer, because it didn't require an answer. A warmth on her wrist, strong, steady, trust level 40. They waited 3 days. Soldiers stood outside the village. They didn't go in. Min-ho walked through the yards, telling people that the new owner was a criminal and that they'd be taking him away soon. Some listened, most didn't. An old woman from the house at the far end stepped out onto her porch with a broom and chased Min-ho away from her yard. On the 3rd day of the soldiers' standoff, another horseman rode up to the camp. Alone. In travel clothes, not military, but civilian. Min-ji saw him from the roof and hurried down. His face was pale. She said she knew this man. It was Cho Sang-hyuk, the right-hand man of the head of the Cho clan. From the capital. Not from the county, from the capital. He had come in person. That meant the stakes had risen. It meant this wasn't just about the magistrate. It meant the main branch of the clan had gotten involved. Artem watched the lone horseman. The man dismounted. He spoke with the commander of the soldiers. Then he looked toward Artem's house. For a long time. Directly. As if he could see through the walls. Then he mounted his horse and rode away. Back toward the highway. Min-ji said he hadn't come to give orders. He'd come to confirm. To make sure the target was in place. To report. After his report, it won't be 12 who come. It'll be 50 or 100. Artem sat and thought. Time is running out. The seal hasn't been repaired. Soldiers are at the gates. The Cho clan is on its way. It's 45 days to the capital. So-yeon is growing weaker. Min-ji is nervous. Da-hee is silent, which always means she's thinking about something bad. Ga-ul is working non-stop in the smithy, forging something he won't talk about. Ha-eun brings news every evening, each piece worse than the last. Artem stood up. He went out into the courtyard. He looked at the moat, at the rampart, at the pots of gunpowder, at the forest, at the village. He's a sapper. A sapper doesn't fight. A sapper defuses. But what can you do when there are so many mines that there aren't enough hands to handle them all? Then a sapper does one thing. He builds a corridor, a safe passage through the minefield. Narrow, precise, for those who follow him. He returned to the house. He said that tomorrow morning they're heading to the eastern checkpoint. Everyone. All 6 of them. The house will be left empty. Let the soldiers come in. Let them search. They'll find nothing but empty rooms and a locked door to the basement. And the door to the basement won't open without 2 keys. So-yeon looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. She stood up, straightened up. She said she was going. They set out before dawn, 6 of them, through the back wall of the courtyard, across the moat, through the forest. Min-ji led the way, silently, like a shadow. Artem followed her. So-yeon followed him. Da-hee followed her. Ga-ul carried the horn and the leather bags. Ha-eun brought up the rear. She carried a sack of food and water. 4 hours through the winter forest along the river to the east. By dawn, they reached the riverbank. The river was frozen. The ice was thick, but there were patches of open water near the shore. The burial mound stood on a headland, a small peninsula jutting into the river. Water on 3 sides, a trail on the 4th. Just one. Narrow. Artem assessed the situation. An ideal position for defense. 1 trail, 1 approach. The burial mound was like a fortress, but also a trap. If the trail were blocked, there would be nowhere to retreat. The river, the ice, the patches of open water. They descended to the burial mound. The eastern seal. The pillar was split, just like the northern one, just as clean, just as even, with the same tool. Artem examined it. 2 halves, a crack running through the center. Standard work. He already knew what to do. Ga-ul set up the brazier. She stoked the fire. 20 minutes of heating. The stone began to sing. Artem and So-yeon stood on either side, hands on the stone. She looked at him. He looked at her. 1 word, simultaneously. Hold. The crack began to close. Slowly. Harder than the previous 2 times. The stone resisted. Artem felt a vibration in his palms. Strong. Almost painful. So-yeon clenched her teeth. Her hands were trembling. The tattoos on both their wrists glowed a bright blue. The crack had closed 2/3 of the way. Then it stopped. It wouldn't go any further. Something was in the way. Artem looked down. Inside the crack, where the stone hadn't come together, a small object, driven into the gap. An iron wedge. Someone had driven an iron wedge into the crack. On purpose, so that even if someone tried to repair the seal, the wedge would prevent the stone from closing. A trap. An engineering trap. Artem recognized the principle. An anti-personnel mine with a locking pin. If the wedge is pulled out without preparation, the stone will snap shut. The shock will jolt his hands. It could break his bones. It could kill whoever is holding it. If the wedge is left in place, the seal won't work. He told So-yeon not to move. She froze, her hands on the stone, her face white with tension. Artem held the pillar with 1 hand. With the other, he reached for the wedge. His fingers touched the metal. It was cold. It was driven in tightly. He had to pull it out while simultaneously controlling the closing of the stone. He needed 3 hands. He had 2. He looked at So-yeon. He told her that when he gave the signal, she should let go of the pillar and wrap her arms around his. Both of them, with her own hands, so that they would become 1. 4 hands instead of 2. 2 bodies instead of 1. She understood. She nodded. Artem exhaled. He said, "Now." She let go of the pillar. She grabbed his hands. Their fingers interlocked, tightly, until it hurt. Artem yanked the wedge. The iron came out of the stone. The stone shattered. The crack closed. A vibration surged through their hands, through both of their hands, together. The shockwave passed through 4 hands instead of 2. It split. It weakened. Their hands went numb, but they were intact. Not a single broken bone. The pillar stood, intact, glowing. 4 out of 4. All the seals are working. Artem sat on the ground, holding So-yeon's hands in his. She sat across from him. Their faces were half a meter apart. She was breathing heavily. He was breathing heavily. But they were both smiling. Together for the first time. A heat on their wrists. Trust level 50. The words rang out clearly in Artem's head. The third door is fully accessible. The throne room is open for inspection. So-yeon heard the same thing. He could see it in her eyes. They sat on the frozen ground in a burial mound by the frozen river, holding hands and looking at each other, and for 3 seconds, the world around them ceased to exist. Then Min-ji shouted from above. Artem jumped to his feet. He climbed out of the burial mound. He looked at the path. People. 7 of them. They were walking quickly, not soldiers. Others, in gray cloaks, armed, and each had a stone token on a cord around their neck. The returnees. They were heading toward the burial mound, toward the eastern seal, the one they'd just repaired. Min-ji was already standing on the trail, a blade in her hand. Artem stood beside her, the pickaxe he'd brought with him in his hand. 6 on the trail against 7. No, not 6. 2 of them were fighters, him and Min-ji. The rest weren't fighters. Da-hee is a doctor. Ga-yul is a blacksmith. Ha-eun is a 19-year-old girl. So-yeon is a priestess with no combat training. 2 against 7, on a narrow path. Artem assessed the situation. The path was just wide enough for 2 people. The 7 couldn't all attack at once. At most, 2 in a row. That's good. Min-ji drew her blade. She stepped forward. Artem followed her. She said briefly that she'd take the one on the right. Artem nodded. The first 2 approached. Min-ji moved like water, quickly, fluidly, without a wind-up. Her blade found the right man's throat before he could raise his sword. The one on the left struck with his sword. Artem parried the blow with his pickaxe. Iron against iron. Sparks flew. He swung the pickaxe around and struck the man in the chest with the butt. The man flew back a step. A second blow to the knee. He fell. The second pair. Min-ji killed one. The other wounded her in the shoulder. Not deeply. She didn't stop. She finished him off. The third pair. Artem fought in silence. No shouting. No rage. The pickaxe worked like a tool. Strike. Block. Strike. One fell. The second hit Artem in the ribs. Pain. Sharp. A rib cracked. Maybe 2. Artem struck back. The man fell. The 7th. The last one. He stood and watched. He didn't attack. He looked at Artem. A familiar face. Artem stared closely. No, not familiar. But there was something about him. Something Artem had seen before. Not here. Not in this world. But somewhere. The man smiled. He said he was impressed. A sapper fights like a sapper. Even with a pickaxe. Artem froze. A sapper. He said sapper. The man said he knew who Artem was, where he was from, why he had come. That the seal had summoned him. That he was a tool. Not a person. A tool. Summoned to serve the mechanism. Artem stood there and listened. Blood trickled down his ribs, the pickaxe in his hand. The man said that the army must awaken, that the seals are a cage. That for 3 centuries the cage had held what was meant to set this world free, and that 2 people with tattoos on their wrists wouldn't stop what was coming. Then he turned and walked away. He just walked away, down the trail, back, over the bodies of his own men, without looking back. Min-ji wanted to catch up. Artem stopped her. He said not to. She asked why. He said that this man wanted them to catch up to him. He wanted them to leave the seal behind. He wanted someone to stay and break the pillar again while they ran after him. Min-ji looked back, toward the burial mound. Another one was standing at the entrance. The 8th one. The one nobody had counted. With a hammer in his hands. ready to strike the pillar. Minji threw her knife. 20 paces. The knife sank into his thigh. The man fell. The hammer fell from his hand. The pillar was intact. Artem sat down on the ground. His ribs were burning. Dahi was already running toward him. Her hands were covered in Minji's blood, the one she'd bandaged a minute ago. Now it was his turn. She was cursing, quietly, angrily, professionally. 2 ribs. Cracks. Not broken, but it hurt. A lot. Suyan stood nearby, pale, her hands clenched. She couldn't help in the fight, but she stood there. She didn't run away. She didn't hide. She stood there. Dahi bandaged Artem. She looked him in the eyes. She spoke softly so only he could hear. "Don't you dare lose her, soldier. I've buried too many like her." Artem nodded. They walked back for 6 hours, slowly. Artem leaned on Suyan. She held him, silently, firmly. Minji walked ahead with her shoulder bandaged. She didn't complain, she didn't wince, she just walked. Gaul carried the horn. Haun carried the pickaxe. Dahi brought up the rear. 6 of them, alive, wounded, but alive. Artem lay there for 3 weeks. His ribs prevented him from standing up. Dahi tied him to a mat and forbade him from moving. He lay there and gave orders, from a horizontal position. Gaul came every day with a report from the basement. The symbols were deciphered. The diagrams came together. She found the key, the throne room, beyond the 3rd room, beyond 100 warriors, a long corridor leading down, and the hall, huge, with a ceiling that vanished into the darkness, with a stone throne in the center, with a figure on the throne. Not a statue, a human. Or what had been a human 300 years ago. The first keeper, Soyeon's ancestor. He sat on the throne, his hands resting on the armrests. His eyes were closed. His face was calm, but stony. He had become part of the seal, literally. His body had turned into the same material as the warriors, veined stone. He hadn't died. He had become a lock. Gaul said there were final instructions in the throne room, a ritual of resealing, not an awakening, a resealing. The old contract bound the seal to a single person, a single keeper, one key, one lock. But the instructions described another option: 2 keys, 2 people, husband and wife, volunteers, bound not by blood but by choice. If the 2 stand before the throne and utter the word, do not hold, the other, live, the seal will be resealed, not to 1, to 2, not by blood, but by trust. And then the army will not awaken, but it will not disappear either. It will remain, sleeping, but under a different lock, one that cannot be broken with a wedge, cannot be split with a hammer. Because this lock is not stone. This lock is 2 living people who trust each other. Artem lay there and listened. Then he asked for Soyeon to be summoned. She came, sat down beside him. He told her. She listened, in silence. When he finished, she asked one thing. Is he doing this because he has to, or because he wants to? Artem said both. She shook her head. She said it couldn't be both. Has to is a duty. Wants to is a choice. They're different things. She asked again, if there were no seal, if there were no army, if there were no threat, if she were just a woman in a village without a basement and without dead bodies, he would have stayed. Artem was silent. 10 seconds. 20. Then he said yes. She looked at him. He looked at her. 1/2 meter between them, and 5 weeks, and a level of trust that had grown from a number into something more. She leaned in. He leaned in. Their lips met. Briefly. Quietly. Not like in stories, like in real life. Awkwardly. For real. So Young pulled away. Her face was red. For the first time ever. She stood up and left. Quickly. Artem lay there, staring at the ceiling. His ribs ached. But he was smiling. A burning sensation on his wrist. Trust level 65. 2 days later, he got up. His ribs hadn't healed. But he got up because there were horsemen on the horizon. Many of them. Not 12. 50. In dark blue. The Cho clan. Minji was the first to see them. She came down from the roof. Her face was calm. She said her brothers were among the horsemen. Not her real brothers, clan brothers, the ones she grew up with, the ones who taught her to kill. She said she would go to them. Artem said no. She said she had a trump card, one she hadn't used, one she'd carried her whole life without knowing it. She said she was the daughter of the Cho clan chief, born out of wedlock, illegitimate, but a daughter nonetheless. Blood. The very blood they were looking for. They had sent their own blood to kill someone else's, not knowing that the killer was exactly what they were looking for. Artem looked at her. She looked at him. She said that if she went out to them, revealed her real name, and showed the birthmark she'd had on her right shoulder since birth, they wouldn't be able to kill her. Clan law. Blood doesn't shed blood. They'd stop. At least for a while. Artem said it was too dangerous. She replied that everything she'd done for the past 22 years had been dangerous. But for the first time, she was doing something dangerous for the people who'd fed her when she was hungry. She stepped out, alone, down the path, toward the 50 horsemen. Artem stood on the roof and watched. So-yeon stood beside her. Their hands were clasped. Minji approached the formation. She stood before them. She took off her cloak. She bared her right shoulder. On it was a family crest, dark, clear, similar to the one Ha-eun had seen on the village headman's letters. The commander of the horsemen dismounted. He approached. He looked at the mark. He turned pale. Minji spoke. Artem couldn't hear her words, but he saw the formation waver. He saw the horsemen exchange glances. He saw the commander take a step back. Then two. She spoke for 15 minutes. Then she turned and walked back. The formation stood there. It didn't move. It didn't attack. It didn't ride away. It just stood there. She returned. Her face was ashen with tension. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. She said they wouldn't leave, but they wouldn't attack either. Not yet. Not until the messenger reached the capital and the clan chief confirmed or denied it. That would buy them time. 10 days, maybe 12. Artem nodded. 10 days. Enough to prepare for what comes next, for the capital, for the finale. That evening, he went down to the basement, with So-yeon, just the two of them. Through all the halls, through all the doors, to the throne room. They stood before the stone throne, in front of the figure of the first guardian. So-yeon looked at her ancestor's face, stone, serene, 300 years old. She said quietly that he was tired. Artem said they would set him free, soon, when they were ready. She looked at him, asked when. He said when the trust level reached 100. She asked how much it was now. He said 65. She said that was a lot. He said it wasn't enough. She asked what it would take to reach 100. He said he didn't know. The system doesn't give instructions. The system gives results. Trust grows when one takes a risk for another, truly, without guarantees. She was silent. Then she said she knew what was needed, but not now. Soon, when it's all over. They went upstairs. Night. Silence. 50 horsemen beyond the village. An army at their feet. 6 people in the house, and 2 wrists glowing in the dark. Blue. Steady, like 2 lighthouses at the edge of a minefield. It wasn't decided in the capital. It was decided in the basement. On the 45th day after the review, when there were 15 days left before the visit to the capital, a sound emerged from underground. The very sound Artem had feared from day one. The second sentry woke up. Then the third. By morning, 5 stone warriors stood with their eyes open in the third hall. 5 out of 100. Time was running out. Artem went down to the throne room, alone. So-yun was waiting upstairs. He stood before the stone throne and looked at the first keeper. 300 years. 1 man. 1 life devoted to holding back 8,000. He recalled the words of that man from the sect. A tool. Artem isn't a person. A tool. Summoned by the seal to serve the mechanism. Like a spare part. Like a consumable. Like a fuse placed in a circuit to burn out instead of everything else. He stood there and thought. For a long time. Then he went upstairs. So-yun was sitting by the hearth. He sat down next to her. He said he needed to tell her something. Something he'd known for a long time but hadn't said. She turned toward him. She listened. He said that Gaul could read the symbols in the basement because her grandfather was from a line of guardians. He'd known this since the 3rd week. He'd kept quiet. Not to deceive her, for safety's sake. But the system doesn't distinguish between motives. Silence becomes a lie after 24 hours. He'd broken the rule. A long time ago. He felt a twinge on his wrist. Trust level 65. It hadn't dropped. Because he'd told her now. Because the lie hadn't harmed her. But the system had issued a warning. 1 more time and trust will collapse. So-yun listened. Her face was impassive. Then she said she knew. Artem froze. She said she'd known ever since the day Gaul first went down to the basement and read the wall. No one except the lineage of guardians can read those symbols. So-yun knew, and she kept quiet. Because she was waiting for him to say it himself. A test. She was testing him. Just as he had tested every meter of ground for mines, she was testing him for the truth. And he passed. Late, but he passed. Warmth on her wrist. Trust level 70. She forgave him. Not with words, with action. By staying seated next to him. By not moving away. By letting her shoulder touch his. The next day, 3 more warriors woke up. 8 out of 100. Artem gathered everyone. He said they couldn't wait any longer. The renewal ritual had to be performed now. Not in 15 days, not in the capital. Here, now. So-yun stood up. She said she was ready. Artem looked at her. He asked if she was sure. She replied that she had waited 5 years for death. She had waited 2 months for him. Enough waiting. The 2 of them went downstairs together. Through all the halls, through all the doors. Past the 11 sleeping warriors in the 1st and 2nd halls. Past the 100 warriors in the 3rd hall, 8 of whom stood with their eyes open, watching them go. Down, down the long corridor, into the throne room. The first guardian sat on the throne, stone, motionless. But to Artem, it seemed as though his fingers on the armrest had tightened just a little more, as if he too had been waiting. They stood before the throne, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, hands clasped. So-yun looked at Artem. He looked at her. Blue light from the walls. Silence. 8,000 stone bodies beneath their feet, above their heads, and all around them. She said she wanted to say something before the ritual. He told her to go ahead. She said that when he arrived on the first day, she wanted him to die. On the second day, she wanted him to leave. On the third day, she wanted him to stay until morning. On the 10th, she wanted him to stay until spring. On the 20th, she wanted him to stay until the end of the year. Now she wants him to stay. Just stay. No time limit, no conditions, no orders, and no key. She said this isn't a system, not a seal, not trust with a number. It's her. Ha So-yun, 26 years old, the last priestess of a dead lineage. Telling a living person that she wants him to stay. A heat on her wrist, intense, almost scorching. Trust level 100. The number flashed and vanished. It didn't drop, it vanished, because it was no longer needed. When trust is real, the number is unnecessary. They spoke the word, simultaneously. One word. Live. The throne room trembled. The walls lit up, all of them. Every symbol, every line, every diagram. The light rose from the bottom up, like a wave. Across the floor, across the walls, across the ceiling, across all levels, across all halls, across all 8,142 bodies. The stonekeeper on the throne stirred, his fingers unclenched, slowly, like a man letting go of something he'd held for 300 years. His face changed. The stony features softened, for a second. For a single second, Artem saw the face of a living man, an old man, a weary man, a grateful man. Then the stone became stone again, but different, not tense, calm, not holding on, having let go. The seal closed once more, not on one, on two, not on blood, on choice. A wave of light swept through the entire basement and sank into the ground, in 4 directions, toward the 4 pillars. The pillars glowed, all 4, brightly, evenly, blue. A new seal, a new lock. 2 living keys instead of 1 stone one. Upstairs, the stone warriors closed their eyes, all 8 of them, one after another. They drifted back into sleep. Peaceful, not forced, but voluntary, like soldiers who'd finally received the order to stand down. Artem and Soyeon stood in the throne room. The light went out. Only a faint blue glow remained from the tattoos on their wrists. 2 beacons in the darkness. She rested her head on his shoulder. He rested his chin on the top of her head. They stood like that for a minute. Maybe 2. Maybe 10. Then they went upstairs. They were waiting for them in the house. Da-hee by the hearth. Min-ji by the window. Ha-eun in the doorway. Ga-ul with her hands smeared with soot. Everyone was watching. So-yeon stood next to Artem. Their hands were clasped. She said one word. Hold. Da-hee exhaled. Min-ji let her shoulders drop. Ha-eun smiled. Ga-ul nodded. Artem stepped out onto the porch. Evening. Sunset. Snow in the yard. The village below. Smoke rising from the chimneys. 50 horsemen of the Cho clan were still standing beyond the village. But that no longer mattered, because beneath that village lay an army that could not be roused by a wedge nor stolen away by a hammer. One could only ask. Together. And it would listen. If both agreed. The next day, a letter arrived. A royal messenger. A gold seal on black paper. A letter from the Queen Mother. A short one. She wrote that she was waiting, that in the capital, the Cho clan was preparing charges, that Magistrate Cho Byung-il had been arrested on her orders for forging records and arson, that the crown prince was under the clan's influence, but the crown still belonged to the king, and that she was sending something with the messenger, for So-yeon. The messenger handed her a bundle, small, heavy. So-yeon unwrapped it. Inside was a seal, an imperial seal, a regent's seal, golden, with the coat of arms of the Ha clan, the true Ha clan, not the noble branch, the priestly branch, the guardian branch, the very one that had been struck from the annals 300 years ago and declared extinct. So-yeon held the seal in her palms. Her hands didn't tremble. For the first time ever. For the first time in her life. She raised her head. She looked at Artem. He was looking at her. She said she was ready to go to the capital. Artem said they would go together. She nodded. Of course, together. 2 keys, 1 door. They were standing on the porch of a house on the edge of the village, near the forest. A house with a stone foundation, with a repaired roof, with a straight fence, with a ditch on 3 sides, with 5 chickens and 1 skinny horse. A house where, 2 months ago, a woman had slept with a knife under her pillow. Now the knife lay on a shelf in the kitchen, next to the ladle and the cutting board, where knives belong. Suyun turned to Artem. She asked what his name was, his real name. He said Artem. She repeated it, slowly, unusually. The name sounded strange in her language, but she pronounced it in full, right down to the last sound. Then she said she liked it, and that now this name was engraved in stone, next to her name. 2 names, 1 lock, 8,000 witnesses beneath their feet. She took his hand. He didn't let go. The sunset was fading behind the forest. The snow glistened. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside the house, Da-hee was scolding Min-ji for taking the sling off her shoulder again. Ha-eun was laughing. Ga-ul was hammering away in the smithy. The village was alive. Artem stood there, watching it all. The house he had built, not out of stone, out of people, out of trust, out of 30 shared breakfasts, 12 sleepless nights, and a single kiss in the throne room. He hadn't overthrown the king, not yet. He hadn't destroyed the Cho clan, not yet. He hadn't buried the returnees, not yet. But he had done what he promised. He had built a home where she no longer slept with a knife under her pillow. The rest lay ahead. The capital. The clan. War. But that's another story. And this one ended here, on the porch, at sunset, with her hand in his, and with the silence from the basement. Calm. Steady. The silence of an army that sleeps not because it was forced to, but because 2 people upstairs trust each other. The seal holds. The house stands. She's by his side. That's enough.